And I'm not going to show a screen yet. So you guys are just going to look at me and look at each other. But I do just want to take a few brief minutes. How many of you took the time, had a chance to look over Unit 7 over the weekend? Good. There's some good stuff in there, isn't it, you guys? I mean, you think about, we spent 3 hours on like what, the first 8 or 9 pages, something like that. So when we say Unit 7 is dense, you know, there's a lot. If you read Unit 7 and you said, oh, that's easy, agency, I get it, you're doing it wrong. I don't know another way to put that. Agency is not a one and done. Agency is something you got to revisit over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. We've talked about the power of repetition. And remember, you guys, agency, I mean, this is Red Star material, which means you're not going to see a test question that says, what are the duties that we owe a client? And one of those answer choices are going to be old car. You're not going to see that as a test question. They're going to put you in a situation and ask you how you're going to respond. That's what an application test is. So we need to have this understanding. So I do just want to take a few minutes. Turn with me in your book. Let's go look at page 137. Doing a quick review. Hello. On 137, there's just some words there. Need to understand the words, know the words. I do recommend flashcards for these words so we have a good understanding. Don't forget, there's a glossary in the back of the book. So you may want to use what you see here on page 137 plus what you see in the glossary to help get yourself a good definition of these words. So we've talked in quite a good detail about some of these. We're going to talk about the rest of them tonight. Over on page 138, we defined the duties that we owe the client, the duties that we owe the principal. And the easy way to remember those duties is to remember old car. Again, you're not going to get a test question. What do we owe the client? Not going to happen. But we do need to have this understanding of these duties. Old car can help you recall them, help you remember them. Who can remind me? The agency relationship is between the client and whom?
The firm.
Firm. Thank you guys. Not the individual agent. You, the individual agent, don't have an agency relationship with buyers and sellers. Isn't that something? You have the relationship with the firm. The firm has the relationship with the client. The firm allows you to work with their buyers and sellers. You become a client, you become a principal when you hire the firm. You do so by entering into an agency agreement. So hang tight with me on agency agreements. We're going to get into those in Unit 8. So the firm and the client, also known as the principal, have the relationship. Does that mean I can leave the customer, the one that didn't hire me, high and dry? I just leave them off the side? Shake your head no. They're still on my plane, aren't they? They're still a part of the transaction. I'm still there to help them. They're just not getting that same level service. So if the one that hires me gets old car, what's the one that doesn't hire me get?
Great customer service.
Great customer service. Specifically, I hear it, yes. Specifically with great customer service, we're going to offer them, let's rattle these off together, you guys. Honesty, fairness, and the disclosure material facts. That's not together. What do we owe the customer? Everybody. Honesty, fairness, and the disclosure of material facts. They are in your plane. You have a duty to get them from point A to point B. You're just not giving them loyalty. You're not giving them obedience. You're not giving them confidentiality. So we're going to take care of those in our plane. The one that didn't hire me is back in coach. The one that did is up in first class. And then we spend a good amount of time over on page 142, 143, talking about material facts. I got another resource for you guys tonight. I showed you a couple places that you can look at in the online learning system over this weekend to help you focus. on material facts. Specifically, the top of page 143 tells us specifically things that are material facts. Remember that broad definition of material facts is just something that a reasonable person would consider relevant. What the heck does that mean? And isn't that subjective as all get out? Something that I might find relevant, something that I may consider a deal breaker, you may not. So the commission says, okay, let's break this down. So here are the specifics, things that are specifically considered material facts. Let's run a scenario. Well, first off, do I ever have a reason not to disclose material facts? What's the except? When do we not have to disclose material facts?
There is no exception.
Ah, you didn't take the bait. Thank you, Rachel. We always have a duty to disclose material facts. Did y'all hear my absolute word? Remember when we started, I said words matter? When you see or hear the word always, as Rachel said, there is no exception. We always have a duty to disclose material facts. I don't care who you're talking to. Are you talking to a client or a customer? Everybody in your plane gets material facts. So let's say you are the listing agent and you get your sellers under contract. Maybe another firm brings the buyer. So congratulations, you have your sellers, your listing under contract. The buyer chooses to have a radon test during their contract to closing period, their due diligence period. The buyer chooses to have a radon test. And the radon level comes in at, make a number up, 7.4 picocuries. Anybody remember the magic number for radon? You can show me. Yeah, good. 4. Anything over 4 is considered undesirable. So 7.4, something to be addressed. Yes? Shake your heads, yes or no. Does the seller have to install a mitigation system? Buyer says, radon 7.4, I want you to put in a mitigation system. Does the seller have to do it? Nah, because in North Carolina, properties are sold as is. So the seller doesn't have to change a light bulb if they don't want to. And they certainly don't have to put in a mitigation system to address the radon. Well, let's say there are some other issues, and ultimately this buyer chooses to exercise their right and terminates the contract. I will talk all about that when we get into Unit 10. Stay with me. You're the listing agent. The buyer terminates, in part because of the 7.4 picocary radon level. You go back on the market, listing agents. Do you have material fact on your hand now? You better believe you do, because now you know that that radon level is 4.0 picocaries or higher. I don't care how you learn. It could be that the agent shared it with you. Maybe they told you why the buyer terminated. Maybe they didn't. But if they do, you now have material facts on your hand. So we can get material facts from a property, not just the seller sharing, but we may also get material facts through the buyer's inspections, the buyer's process, various places. So remember those little red flags, you guys, and always keep on the lookout for those little red flags. Remember, my job is to discover and disclose, not diagnose. All I can do in that case is suggest. I can tell the seller, if this buyer terminates and we go back on the market, I now have to disclose this radon level. Radon's not going to go away on its own. So now we know we're going to have to deal with it with the next buyer, possibly the next buyer. You guys with me? I can't make anybody buy. I can't make anybody close. My duty is to discover and disclose those material facts. In some cases, it might be in the seller's best interest to put in the mitigation system or to address the repair. I think for sellers, ultimately, it comes down to time versus money. So if they have all the time in the world and they want the money, they may choose not to address it and go on the market. It's up to them. Remember, I'm a fact finder. I provide the information for who to make the informed decision. For them, not me. I'm not the one selling this house. I'm not the one buying it. So we talked about, and some more on material facts, And then starting on page 143, we looked at what I call the big four. These are the prohibited conducts. This is what you get in trouble for if you don't handle material facts correctly. Remember, we always have that duty to discover and disclose. So if you, well, okay, we never can lie about it. Is everybody good with that? You never have a reason to lie. No lying. Okay. And then the other thing we can do is omit it. Keep your mouth shut, not disclose. Have you just violated your agency duty? Yes, because we always have a duty to discover and disclose material facts. And again, you guys, this isn't a situation of don't ask, don't tell. The next buyer may not specifically ask about the radon level. Does that negate your duty? No, we always have that duty. And once you know, you can't unknow. So we are here, we're getting ready to get into a little bit more on material facts and keep going on our agency duties. Just a couple things. I know this is a lot. Can we all agree with that? It's a lot to take in. And I know there's some concern about how this is all going to come together for you to do this in like the real world, like when you're licensed and you're ready to work with buyers and sellers. But always remember, you guys, this class is introducing you to these topics. We're scratching surfaces. 7, 8, 9, and 10 is probably the most in-depth that we get. But even with that, there's more afterwards. Always remember too, and we will talk about in this unit, you affiliating with a firm and the firm helping you guys, getting you through. We talked about checklists. So I don't want you guys to think that you need, all the knowledge of an agent when you leave this class. Remember our focus. My job is to get you through the state exam. Once you get through the state exam and you get your license, rest assured, you got a lot more training opportunities with your firms to come. So big deep breath with me. And know that we're just introducing you to it. It's a lot to take in. So I hope you're embracing it. The other thing I'll say, back in my administrative days, I did a lot of new agent training with the firm I was with. So I got you guys right when you were licensed, and you guys were awesome. You came in and you were so excited, but you had no idea why. You didn't know what to expect. And one of the common questions I got in new agent training was, how do I know what to say? When I'm talking to a seller, when I'm talking to a buyer, how do I know what to say? Again, rest assured that in time, that'll come naturally. But in the meantime, I'm a huge fan. I'm a huge believer of, if you and I are familiar with the forms help put words in our mouth. We're only really looking at 3 forms in this class, and there are hundreds available to us. Did y'all know in real estate we love our paperwork? Anybody tell y'all that? I mean, we love our forms. We're talking about some, but we're really only introducing you to 3. Again, just easing you in. So next unit, we're going to look at our listing agreement, the agreement that the seller uses to hire the firm. We're also going to look at our buyer agency agreement, the agreement that the buyer uses to hire the firm. And then when we get into unit 10, we're going to look at our standard offer to purchase and contract. So just a very brief review. Again, that was like, 12 minutes. I did. Thank you. I don't take attendance when we log on, because I got a Zoom log that tells me what time you logged on. So I just do attendance after the breaks. I know several of you asked me about that, but I got you. Questions or comments up to this point? It's a lot to take in. And once again, I cannot stress enough that power of repetition, hearing it over and over again, reading it over and over again. And then once we get to the forms, reading those, let those be what guides you, what helps put words in your mouth. So we are on page 146, still a little bit about material facts, but this is like a material fact with a twist. And there are a couple of things that North Carolina has declared not a material fact. Now, hang on before you start writing every single word on the slide in front of you. Hang on. PowerPoints and we're recording. Is y'all's hand hurting yet? When I say it's not a material fact, what we're saying is I don't have to volunteer the information. I don't have to disclose. Could I choose to disclose? Sure, but you're not required to. Also, with it not being a material fact, if we don't have to volunteer the information, I still don't have a golden ticket to lie. So if I'm asked and I know, I got to respond truthfully. So a couple of things in North Carolina, and this varies from state to state. A couple of things that are not a material fact in North Carolina. First up is our stigmatized properties. The haunted house on the block. Anybody ever grow up near one of those? Those are a lot of fun. The haunted house, the stigmatized property, convictions of serious crimes, murder, suicides, death, illness, etc. Not a material fact, meaning you don't have to volunteer the information. If you are listing the haunted house on the block, you don't have to volunteer that. However, if you're asked, we cannot lie. You don't have to show many houses before you're asked. You'll be asked soon in your career, did anybody ever die in this house? I think that is a common question that people ask. Curiosity, right? If you know, you have to disclose. If you don't, if you're asked, only if you're asked, you have to disclose. But if you don't, isn't I don't know a fair answer? Isn't I don't know, let's go Google it and see if they're asking, aren't they asking for a reason? And if it's something of significance and it's hit the news, I mean, sometimes we get stigmatized properties that make national news. That's kind of hard to hide behind, right? When everybody knows, and of course the neighbors know, and they like to show up and share. So just, have these conversations with your sellers. I took a CE class, continuing education class, a couple of years ago, and the agent shared with us that he was listing a property. And you know what? Hold that story. Hold that story for the next slide. Never mind. I got ahead of myself. Hold that story. So not a material fact, stigmatized properties. There is one exception to this rule. If you are ever asked if anybody ever lived in this house that had AIDS or HIV, your answer is always, and y'all only want to write this down, I'll say it a couple times. Your answer is always federal fair housing prohibits me from answering that. I'll say it again. Anybody ever let in this house have AIDS or HIV? Federal fair housing prohibits me from answering that. Those with AIDS and HIV are protected under the handicap disability of fair housing. And whether you know or not, your answer is always federal fair housing prohibits me from answering that. I got a whole unit dedicated to fair housing. So we're going to talk about fair housing and state fair housing when we get to Unit 19. This always impresses me when we get there and I say, what's the exception? And you guys all say AIDS or HIV, because that is the exception to the stigmatized properties. Everybody have that jotted down? Federal fair housing prohibits me. What does prohibit mean? Like it's right up there with always, right? Prohibits me from answering that. The other thing, or another thing that's not a material fact in North Carolina, is the presence of convicted sex offenders nearby. Now, I know this may bump on your moral compass a little bit, but let's talk this through. First off, it specifically says convicted sex offenders, meaning they've been caught and charged. Not all sex offenders have been caught yet, have they? Not all sex offenders have been charged yet. Specifically, what this addresses is convicted. If they're not caught, and I don't want you guys making a statement like, no sex offenders live in this neighborhood, because you don't know. you don't know that they've not been caught, they've not been charged yet. Everybody with me so far? So that word convicted implies that they've been caught and charged. Once a sex offender has been convicted, then they must register their address on the North Carolina Sex Offender Registry website. Your buyers, especially your buyers with kids and your tenants with kids, very well may ask about the demographics of the neighborhood. Are there any sex offenders nearby? And when it comes to this one, I'm such a big fan of being the source of the source. And what I mean by that is sending them to the North Carolina Sex Offender Registry website and letting them look, letting them determine what they're comfortable with. Megan's Law is the national law that does require sex offenders to register their address. I was fortunate enough a couple classes ago to have a pre-licensing student who used to work for the state social service. And she said the problem is that the sex offender registry website only updates like every 30 days. So you may have a sex offender move in today, but they're not on the registry until, the end of February. The other thing too to keep in mind, as we're indicating here, sex offenders can and do move. So while you may not have a sex offender nearby today, that's not preventing a sex offender from moving in tomorrow. So because of all the what ifs, because of all the moving pieces of this, I think the best practice is to be the source of the source. And when your buyers and tenants ask, are there convicted sex offenders nearby? Get them to that registry. And you guys, after class, please, but you can just Google North Carolina Sex Offender Registry. You can put in an address. It'll give you like a radius map and it'll show you if there's any convicted nearby. Not a material fact, meaning I don't have to disclose it. However, if I'm asked, I can't lie. And even if you think you know the whole neighborhood, I never want any of you flat out saying no, because you just don't know. All we know is what's on the registry website. I mean, bottom line, especially in a new neighborhood, let's know where our kids are and who they're with. So the CE class, this is the story. The CE class I took a couple years ago, and the gentleman shared with us that he was at a listing appointment, and the sellers told him there's a convicted sex offender across the street. They said, do we need to disclose that? And he said, well, not in North Carolina. We don't have to. And they ended up having a conversation about it. And in the end, the sellers chose to disclose. I thought that was pretty honorable of the sellers. In the end, the sellers decided we would want to know. So let's be upfront and tell others. Hear me, that was a choice. Did they have to do it? Did the agent have to do it? No, if we can choose, if we volunteer, we just can't lie about it. So not considered a material fact are those stigmatized properties. Also not considered a material fact are the presence of convicted sex offenders nearby. Questions on that? So why don't you guys set your chats to just me, direct message to me. I'm going to ask you guys a question, and I'd like you to send me a private message, A, B, C, or D. Everybody ready? So in a private chat, and take your time with this one, we talked about latent defects last week. We talked about material facts. Something that's latent is hidden, not obvious. I can't disclose what I don't know. Yes? Okay, so tell me in a private chat, A, B, C, or D. few more seconds and we're going to talk this through. So let's see what we got. Which of the following would likely be considered a material fact requiring disclosure by a broker in a sales transaction? So A says improper drainage that is resulting in below ground movement not yet visible around the foundation. If I can't see it, if I don't know that it's there, do I have anything to disclose? So it's not yet visible. Maybe one day it will be visible, but today it's not. So I have nothing to disclose with number A. B says water intrusion in the basement that has remained hidden behind the drywall. The only way to find that is to bust into the drywall. So remember, we're not going to damage anybody's personal property. You guys see these words that we're kind of looking for now? Things that aren't obvious. And I know it's hard because you're reading it, so you know. But if you weren't reading it, if it's hidden, if it's not yet visible, you wouldn't know. Does that make a little bit more sense? So hidden, not yet visible. These are these latent, L-A-T-E-N-T defects. Seller's been notified that the HOA is adding sidewalks, resulting in an assessment. Seller will pay in full before closing. What's the buyer going to have to do with this? Nothing. So we got nothing to disclose here, right? Guess what? The buyer's getting a house with brand new sidewalks. That's actually good news. They don't have to pay for it. So that's good news. And then the last one, the seller finished the basement without a permit. We talked about permits back in unit 5 or 6, I think it was. Once we learn about unpermitted space, we have that duty to disclose. I can count it in my total heated square footage, but when we went to that basement, it's nice and it's finished and it looks a lot newer than the rest of the house. Then our little red flag go up to ask some questions. Aren't we going to say, wow, this is a nice finished basement. Did you all do that? And if they say yes, our next question is, did you guys have permits pulled? And depending on how they answer is what we disclose with that. So the one that would likely be considered a material fact is the unpermitted space. Questions on this one? A couple of you told me you changed your answer. So for those of you that did that, my question to you is, did you change it from wrong to right, or did you change it from right to wrong? How many of you are guilty of changing an answer from right to wrong? Look at all those hands go up. Stop it. Stop it right now. Most of the time, the majority of the time, your gut instinct is correct. I only want you guys changing answers if you're like 5,000% sure. Do not start that habit. If you have started that habit, please break it.
So the material fact is something that we know for sure that we can see, and something that has definitely been told to us. Because I chose B, so it's kind of tricky for me.
That's right. And the only reason you know about this water intrusion is because you're reading the answer choice on it. But if you were standing in this basement, you wouldn't know that there's water intrusion because it was hidden behind the drywall. Does that? And I know,
Okay,
Angela,
yeah,
I know where that gets tricky. You know that there's water intrusion because you're reading it, Julie. It's right there on the screen. I can see it. But if you were standing in this basement, you wouldn't know that. And that's what we're trying to, pull out. Does that help? I know those first two were like, but I know. I hear you.
Yeah, I get it. Thank you.
For those, of course. So look for those words, hidden, not yet visible, can't easily detect. So to Angela, to answer your question, yes, we only disclose those things that we can see, hear, touch, feel, smell, or that is told to us by the seller.
Julie, but D would be a public record, right? Like you.
Well, it wouldn't be because they didn't have permits.
Well, you could pull and see that, they didn't get the permit for the.
That's right. So if you wanted to, Rachel, yeah, because permits they're down in the public records, of course. So you wouldn't have to, and that was just an example asking the seller. But if you're a good agent, you're researching this property, right? You're learning about this property in many cases before you ever meet the seller, before you see the property. So you know there's no permits, and then you go see this nicely finished, unfinished basement. You know what I'm saying? So your little red flag goes up to ask some questions. You know there's no permits there. I don't want you to all get accusatory and, you know, point your finger in the seller's face and say, I know for a fact you didn't get permits. You know, be cool, ask questions about it. But, you know, these are the little red flags that we're looking for. Okay, that was fun. Let's do it again. A, B, C, or D. And note the word in this question is looking for the except. Think about who the selling agent is. Ing. Van. So first off, okay, read the question first, Julie. The selling agent must disclose all the following to the seller except. Remind me who the selling agent is. Who is that agent working with?
The buyer.
The buyer. The selling agent is working with the buyer. The listing agent is working with the seller. So we got the buyer's agent. If we want to put that another way, we got the buyer's agent must disclose all the following to the seller, except, now wait a minute. Why is the buyer's agent disclosing stuff to the seller? Because we always have a duty to discover and disclose material facts. Our role doesn't matter, and it doesn't matter who you're talking to. In this case, isn't the seller your customer? So there's certain things that we need, material facts that we need to share with them. Buyer's poor credit resulting in loan denial. We're under contract. We find out that the buyer can't get loan approval. Is that a material fact to the seller? Absolutely, because if we don't get loan approval, buyer can't buy, and doesn't that negatively impact the seller? So that's that third material fact. What was that, page 143 or something like that? And I think that's the one that's the hardest to get, because you're the buyer's agent, but you must disclose if your party can't complete the transaction. So we got loan denial. The roof leak that was discovered during the inspection. So again, we go under contract. The buyer has a home inspection done. It was discovered that there was a roof leak. Y'all don't assume sellers go in their attics. Don't assume homeowners go in their crawl space. There could have been a roof leak there all along that they didn't discover until the home inspector went in. Once the selling agent finds out about the roof leak, don't they now have a material fact on their hand? And they have a duty to disclose that. The buyer's agent, selling agent, disclosing the maximum price their client will pay. Does that sound like old car to you? I agree. And then the last one, proposed zoning amendment for the neighboring lot. You know, somebody said the seller would already know that. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Maybe they don't pay attention, maybe they don't. We always have a duty to disclose material facts. It doesn't matter who you're talking to. So in this case, the one thing that the selling agent is going to keep to themselves is how high your buyer is willing to go. You know, think about it. Let's say you're the listing agent. Congratulations, listing agents. And I'm the selling agent, and I'm bringing you an offer. And I call you up and say, I'm sending you an offer, but my guys are willing to go $75,000 more than the offer. What's your, because you got to tell your seller that, right? And what's your seller going to say? I want 75,000 more dollars. We're not going to hurt each other's, our clients' negotiation powers. Just because your buyer's willing to go 75, for example, more, we don't share that with the other side. They're going to take advantage of that situation. We're going to talk more about things that we can discuss. We're getting into that in this unit. But yeah, how high your buyer is willing to go or how low your seller is willing to go, that's all part of the game, you guys. And that's how we can protect our clients by not blabbing that information.
Julie, so you said we would not disclose that to our client?
We would
Yes.
not disclose that to the seller.
Okay. Okay.
Because you're the buyer's agent. So you're not going to tell the seller, this is how high they're willing to go.
Okay. Now, if it's a situation where the seller's agent tells us what you just said about they're willing to offer 75,000 more, we would, because we know.
You're going to tell your seller that, absolutely. But you're the listing agent. Yep. So as the
Okay.
listing agent, yeah, I'm going to tell them everything I know about this offer, everything I know about those buyers, right? I want them to have all that information when they're making that decision, including that they're willing to go $75,000. You got to feed the machine, you know? Y'all haven't eaten dinner yet. You should grab some. Questions on this one? Again, you guys, hopefully this is helping you see things. Like we said, every single word. If this said listing agent, this would be a whole different answer to it, right? We'd have more than one. So the words matter, the roles matter. And part of, I know there's a lot to read, totally get it. But part of hopefully getting you guys working on practice quizzes in the book, the online learning system, not only are we making sure you have the information, which is important, but we're also helping you learn how to dissect some of these dang questions. Because some of them get lengthy, and the longer they get, the trickier they get. So stay focused, always just stay focused on what the question's asking, and note that every single word means something. On page 147, there are additional duties. I'm going to go through these like really quick because we're going to see these again in more detail when we get into license law and commission rule, which is our state specific section, which is the very last section that we go over. So we're going to just go through real quick right now. That's all you get right now is a couple bullet points, and knowing we'll come back. It'll be a good opportunity at the end to go through these things in more depth. And I'll show you guys where you can get some examples, that kind of thing too. So everybody good with that? That's my game plan. So we have some other additional duties. In addition to not lying or omitting material facts, we have other additional duties. Some we owe just to principals, some we owe to customers, some we owe to both. An additional duty I owe to both is to avoid making false promises. If you promise somebody you're going to do something, do it. Don't try to persuade them into making a decision through your false promises. For our principal, we always have a duty to avoid a conflict of interest. I think the other day, the example of a conflict of interest that we used was me listing property that I own. I'm the seller and the listing agent. I can't represent the buyer in that transaction. Because if I'm representing the buyer, Old Car says I owe them obedience, loyalty, etc. But let's face it, y'all, if my name is on the deed, whose best interest do I actually have? Mine. And it would I know we want to be good people and say, oh, I would treat that buyer with, but come on, bottom line, it's a conflict of interest that self-dealing that we need to make sure we avoid. We are getting into dual agency, thus we will get into undisclosed dual agency in just a bit. So that is a conflict of interest. Representing another broker or firm without consent. A full broker can be affiliated with two firms at the same time, as long as you have both firms' permission. Both brokers, both firms have to know. So let's say, I don't know what y'all's retirement plan looks like, but mine's probably a condo at the beach somewhere with my toes in the sand, living my days out with my toes in the sand. That's what I'm dreaming. I got to work a little bit harder, but that's okay. I'm getting there. So I may choose when I retire, when I get my condo at the beach, I may choose to keep my condo here in High Point. I don't know, come back and forth, visit family and stuff, right? And when I get to that point, I may also choose to have my license hung at the beach and also here in the Triad. And that's okay for me to do, as long as both brokers give consent, as long as both brokers say that's okay. Another example, maybe you've been doing residential sales for years and years and years and years and years. And then all of a sudden you get an opportunity to do commercial. You don't want to give up residential, but you want to dabble in commercial. Maybe your residential firm only does residential and you find a commercial firm that only does commercial. Could you be affiliated with a residential and a commercial firm? Sure, as long as you have consent of both. Additional duties we owe principal and customers. We got to properly account for funds held in a trust account or an escrow account. We're going to talk about the trust account and license law and commission rule, handling other people's money. We have to act competently, have to perform the services that are required by our agency relationships. What are those services, you ask? They're spelled out in our agency agreements. The firm's duty to the client has duties to the firm. We have to avoid improper conduct. We have to be honest in all dealings. They just sure take the fun out of everything, don't they? So we have to act competently. We have to avoid improper conduct. There's a commission rule. You don't need to know the rule. I just have it here for reference. But there is a commission rule that says I have a duty to deliver all instruments 3 days from my receipt of the signed documents. So first off, let's talk about what the heck an instrument is. An instrument is just any document related to this transaction. So typically speaking, the relationship starts with our agency paperwork. Once we get that signed, I have 3 days to send a copy to my new client. Fast forward, we go under contract. I now have contract paperwork. I have 3 days to send them a copy from the day I receive it. Fast forward one more time, we're going to closing, which means we have closing paperwork. I have 3 days to make sure that I deliver those to my clients. We have 3 days, and note that word says deliver. What do they do when they get, when they get it? Well, I don't know, it doesn't matter to me. My job is to get it to them. It's as easy as sending an email with a PDF attachment. Here's our signed agency agreement. I look forward to working with you. And now you have a date and time stamp of when you sent it. What do we document? Everything. So we have that date and time stamp. So delivery of instruments within 3 days of our receipt. Good rule of thumb, if they sign it, they deserve a copy of it within 3 days. We have another commission rule that says I have to disclose my fees and commissions. Again, we're talking about your commission when we get into Unit 8. But the client needs to know what the firm charges for commission. If we're going to get any kind of bonuses, maybe the builder is offering a bonus to the buyer's agent. If you bring us a executed offer within, by the end of January, we'll give you a $500 bonus. That's got to be disclosed to my buyer client. and customer, both. We have to disclose our commissions, compensations, bonuses, etc. So again, more on these additional duties. And before we leave tonight, I'm going to show you guys another resource to help you again with this information. But it's here in the book, so I just wanted to go through it real quick. The other thing, also in your book, the in practice. We're still on page 147. I get asked about errors and omissions insurance. We call it E&O. This is like the doctor's medical malpractice. So real estate, a lot of your firms are not required to provide you with E&O, but if the firm does, and guys, E&O is not going to protect you if it was intentional, if it was, you know, done on purpose, that willful. If you mess up, if you make a mistake, that's why we have insurance. Again, think of it like the doctor's medical malpractice. If they're doing it on purpose, it's not gonna protect them. We can receive commission from third parties. Oh yeah, well, the firm can. All commission has to roll through the firm. Because whose money is it? Whose client is it? It is the firm's. So we can't directly receive anything. But yeah, if somebody wants to pay me to do something, great, make it out to my firm. And then my firm will pay me. Is there a time limit that is tied to the E&O insurance? I don't know. I'm not sure about a time limit. I do know, and I don't know if this has anything to do or not, but I do know commission rule. I think this came up last week. Does anybody know how long we have to keep records? How long we retain records? Did that come up last week? Oh, it did. 3 years. So I know commission requires me to keep everything for 3 years. So is that my E&O time limit? Oh, I'm not sure. That's a great question. I may say I'm going to have to say every policy is different. They're kind of like your home insurance company. You can shop around for different carriers. So your firm, you know, may have a better policy than others. It's not cheap. I'll tell you guys that right now. It is not cheap. The last thing here on page 147 in this section talks about what happens if it goes wrong. I know one of the common questions you guys have, you know, what happens if I get in trouble? What happens if I mess up? Well, I doubt all of this could happen, but these are your possibilities. Guys, always remember, you could sue anybody for anything. So could you be sued by a former client after the transaction closes? Sure. How far are they going to get? That's what I can't answer. That's where we have to get attorneys and judges involved. But I do know this. If you go into that court with zero documentation, you're gonna be hurting. So document everything, because if it goes down, that's what you guys have to protect yourselves. So just to briefly run through these, the Real Estate Commission, remember, they will never fine us. They are a governmental license regulatory board. They regulate our license. So if there's disciplinary action by the Real Estate Commission, your license is suspended. It could be revoked. They could just slap you on the wrist and make you take an extra continuing education class. Disciplinary action is handled on a case-by-case basis. There is no across the board, this is what's going to happen. Each case is reviewed. If a consumer files a complaint with the North Carolina Real Estate Commission, the commission reviews it first off and sees if it is a violation of license law and commission rule, or is it just a complaint? You know, Yelp has made us all online critics, hasn't it? So some cases people are just venting. Sometimes there is a violation of license law and commission rule. If they determine that there could be a violation of license law and commission rule, the Real Estate Commission sends you, the agent, and possibly your BIC, what's known as a letter of inquiry. The letter of inquiry is your opportunity to respond to the complaint. It's your opportunity to respond and say, I did or did not do what I'm accused of being able of doing. Do you think you're going to be able to call the commission and say, I didn't do it? It doesn't work that way. When you respond to the letter of inquiry, you are responding with your documentation. Document, document, document. It's what you got. They review your documentation. If they determine more information is needed, then they may request more. They may determine that based on your supporting documentation, there wasn't a violation of license law and commission rule. They may invite you to a commissioners meeting. The commissioners work or meet once a month. So they may want you to stand in front of them and state your case. Understand, at any time during the disciplinary action, real estate agents are welcome to bring their own attorneys. You can always be represented. And if you're getting called to Raleigh to stand in front of the 9 commissioners, please take an attorney down there with you. Please take an attorney with you if you made it that far. But again, not all of them are. The Real Estate Commission sent a blanket email out to licensees across the state. It must have been, I think it was 2020 when tensions were high. It was a rough year, wasn't it? And tensions were high everywhere anyway. And they sent an email out to licensees and says, guys, we're getting a lot of complaints from consumers saying that their agent cussed them out. Now, you're not going to find a license law or commission rule that says we can't cuss our clients and customers out. But is that acting professional? Is that how a professional should handle the situation? So it wasn't a violation, it wasn't disciplinary action, but they were getting enough phone calls that they warranted a statewide email that said, please don't. And this is the kicker. Sometimes this was happening via email or text. So now the consumer had their documentation. I mean, seriously, you have to cuss somebody out. Do it verbally or over the phone, right? Don't leave them document, don't cuss them out. But you guys are with me, right? There was enough. And again, it's not a violation. Now, if it happens over and over with the same agent, then they may see that as acting improper, right? They may consider that a violation. But yeah, if you cuss out somebody one time, they may just say, please don't do that again. Remember, you're the professional. Let's see. During my time as an agent, do I know anyone that has had to have that happen where they go to Raleigh? I've known plenty that have faced disciplinary action. I've known the majority of the agents I know have gotten a letter of inquiry, have gotten out because they've had their documentation. So I do know a handful. And the next thing that they heard from the commission was, thank you for your cooperation. This matter's been closed. I don't know personally any that have had to go to Raleigh, stand in front of the commissioners, but that just, I don't know, that just makes me nervous. I don't like the idea of that. So this is why we're here, to prevent you guys from having to go down and stand in front of the commissioners. I don't want you to get that far, and that's what this class is all about. Oh, by the way, once you do get disciplinary action, if you do get disciplinary action, they find you guilty and then they discipline your license. So maybe they suspend it for 6 months or 2 years. 2 years is the longest suspension I've seen. They could just flat out revoke it. If they revoke it, they just take your license back and pretend like it never existed. The Real Estate Commission publishes an e-bulletin once a month. And one of the tabs in the e-bulletin is a disciplinary action with your full legal name, city, firm, what you did. And they print it in the local paper. So now grandma knows about it too. Stay out of disciplinary action. Did that just put a little bit of fear in you? This is why we're here. Teaching you your lane, teaching you your speed limit in your lane, and trying to avoid grandma reading in the paper that you got your license, your real estate license suspended for 3 months. I thought you just got that. I did, grandma, but it's big deal. I agree. I don't want to be in the news. I don't want to be on the newspaper. I just absolutely. And that's how I live my life. So let me preface this. When I started, we didn't have this fancy e-bulletin thing. They were still mailing it to us once a month. And it used to be that the disciplinary actions were printed in the back of the bulletin. So us old school people, you'll hear us say, I conduct my life to stay out of the back of the bulletin. Stop and ask yourself, will this put me in the back of the bulletin? And if your answer is yes, I suggest you stop and don't do it. That's what this is doing, teaching you that speed limit. Civil action, again, the injured party could take you to court. They could do both. They could file a complaint at the commission and hire an attorney. The attorney may report it to the commission. The commission can launch an investigation on their own. So based on a phone call from your buyer's attorney, for example, the commission can launch their own investigation. Criminal prosecution, you could be looking at misdemeanor and then civil liability for your misconduct. Again, these last three are court options. We'll talk about that last one next a little bit. But bottom line, what happens if I violate license, law, and commission rule? You could be fined, you could be sued, you could be reported down to the commission. Where's it going to go from there? I don't know. That's where the case by case comes into play. If your license is revoked, can you go through the state exam to get it back? Once you're done, you're done. So once your license is revoked, that's going to follow you forever. And good luck trying to get a real estate license in another state, because that'll pop up. So you think, well, I'll just move to South Carolina. It's going to pop up when you go apply for that as well. So yeah, on to the next career once that license is revoked. We saw this the other night, but just to kind of reiterate, these are the disciplinary actions: 21, 22, 22, 23, material facts. I looked this weekend because I couldn't remember the other day when we saw this. But last year's material facts, they've gone up. So guys, at least the last 2 years, if not longer, roughly half of the disciplinary actions by the North Carolina Real Estate Commission are revolving around material facts. And the majority of those are because the agent didn't disclose. They omitted the material fact. So I leave you with this for break. We always have a duty to discover and disclose material facts. Questions? All right, let's take 10. Welcome back. As we're coming back, after I take attendance, I'm going to do that first. So the cameras are back on. I just wanted to take just a few seconds, share with you. I know some of you may be interested in study groups. This is hard for you guys to do because we're on Zoom. You know, pre-pandemic, you guys would go out in the hall on breaks. You would get to chit chat, and next thing you know, you'd be meeting up at Panera with your books. It's a little bit more challenging to do that now that we're on Zoom. So with that being said, if anybody is interested in forming or discussing a study group, I'm going to leave the call open this evening. I'll stop recording, but I'll leave the call open this evening so you guys can exchange contact information if you're interested. You all may not be able to meet in person because I'm going to venture to say we're scattered all across the state. We may even have some people attending from out of state moving here. So you may not, you know, and again, you guys may form several different study groups, but I do want to give you guys that opportunity to connect and exchange contact information to decide if you can and do want to get together. So we'll do that tonight. And by the way, I'm happy to do that any night. Anytime you want to stay after class and chit chat with your study group or something, we'll stop recording. I'm going to go in the other room so you don't have to worry about me being here. Guys, I've never been involved in study groups, and I really don't plan on starting now, with the exception of answering questions and helping you guys with material. But as far as where you meet, how you connect, do you do WhatsApp, do you do Facebook, do you meet at Panera Bread? I'm not involved in that, and I never will be. So study group, if you're interested, hang around. Comments on that? So moving right along, we've been talking a whole lot about the duties that the agent, the firm, and the broker owe the principal. But understand, our agency agreements are a bilateral contract. And what I mean by a bilateral contract is both parties have duties and obligations. So while we've talked about the agent's duties and obligation to the principal, we also need to talk about what the principal's duties are to us, to the firm and the broker. They have a duty to, they have a duty to act in good faith. They can't hinder my efforts. That agency agreement, these agency agreements are very specific. If you enter into an exclusive right to sell listing agreement with me, you are giving me the right to sell your home. If you enter into a buyer agency agreement with me, you are giving me the right to help you buy a home. You can't hinder my efforts. That's what you hired me to do. You can't prohibit me from doing the job. Let's say, for example, you want to sell your house, you call me, we enter into an exclusive right to sell listing agreement. I market your home. I go through all the effort of putting it on the market, taking pictures and measurements and making it look nice, show ready at all times. And you decline every single showing request you get. It's kind of hard for me to sell your house if you won't let a buyer in the front door. Fair enough? Now, with that being said, I'm going to work around your schedule, especially now post-pandemic. A lot of us are working from home now. And it might be that 9 to 12 is your busy time and you can't get away. Okay, then we can start showings in the afternoon. I know every once in a while we'll have a homeowner with a new baby and the baby takes a nap between 1 and 3 every day. Okay, so we say no showings from 12:30 to 3:30, right? I can work around your schedule, but that's a lot different in you never allowing a buyer, never allowing a showing. Same thing if you hire me to help you buy a house, but you're never available to go see. You're always too busy to go look. It's hard for me to sell you a house if you can't make yourself available. So one of the principal's biggest duties is to act in good faith. The other one is to ensure my commission. Now, again, going to talk all about your commission in Unit 8, just easing you in. Maybe the principal is paying me, maybe the other party is paying me. For example, remember what we said last week, in a typical transaction, the seller pays the listing firm shares their commission with whomever brings the buyer. So in a typical transaction, you're a buyer's agent being paid by the listing firm that's being paid by the seller. The buyer's not paying you directly, but they have a duty to ensure that you will be paid. Our agency agreements are employment contracts. All employment contracts have terms of how the party expects to get paid when they do the job. Again, more on that. And maybe when the buyer may have to pay you. What if your buyer goes after, for example, you have a buyer's agency agreement and your buyer goes after for sale by owner? For sale by owners unrepresented, they didn't hire a firm. They chose to go it on their own. Shake your head. Does the for sale by owner have to pay you? Yes or no? Do they have to? No, they chose to go on their own. So maybe they'll pay you, maybe they won't. If the FSBO is not going to pay you, who is the other party in the transaction? Your buyer. So they have a duty to ensure that we will be paid. They're employment contracts, and they discuss when we expect to get paid. The principal also has a duty to the other side, the third party. Specifically, I think this falls mostly on the sellers, but it would apply to buyers as well. Sellers cannot lie to buyers. Caveat emptor says sellers don't have to disclose. They never have a golden ticket to lie. So if they caught lying, if the buyer's caught lying, they could be held liable for fraud. Either party could be held liable if they breach the offer to purchase and contract. Again, getting there in Unit 10. So if either party doesn't hold what the contract says they do, they could be held there. We'll get into those duties when we get to that unit. If the principal messes up, again, they could get to go to court. If they really mess up, they could be responsible for our misconduct. Now, this is going to have to come down to proof in the court of law. You'd have to prove that you didn't know, you couldn't have found out. The only way you could have responded or acted was based on what your principal told you. Get your attorney involved if this ever happens. But bottom line, if the principal messes up, they could go to court. They could be held responsible for our misconduct. Remember, you guys, the North Carolina Real Estate Commission is a licensing body. Unless you have a real estate license, you don't have to answer to the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. Only licensees. So the seller could mess up, they could lie, they could do all the wrong things. The commission can't touch them because they don't have a real estate license. Does this make sense? It's only licensees that can be held liable under the commission. So remember, you guys, the seller gets to hide behind caveat emptor. The broker is with license law and commission rule. The seller doesn't have to disclose. License law and commission rule says the broker does. In addition to license law and commission rule, there are several other acts that apply to our situation. So real quick, it's all in the name, Unfair Deceptive Trade Practices Act. If anybody's found to be acting unfairly, deceptively, then this act may apply, could go to court. If they're awarded in court, the injured party may be entitled to treble damages. Who knows what that means? Treble damages. Yeah, you take the money damages and you times it by 3. Ouch. So again, anybody can sue anybody for anything. Buyers and sellers can take each other to court all day, every day. The commission's only going to get involved with licensees. Top of page 149, we're going to talk about some classifications of agency relationships. I want you guys to star this page, bookmark it, dog ear it, make flashcards of it when you're studying this weekend. For some reason, the top of page 149 tends to be a huge problem topic. So I want to bring your attention to that right now. And what we're getting into the top of page 149 is a classification of agency relationships. And we have three different classifications, three different, let's say, permissions on how I can proceed, on how I can act, and how the firm can act when we're dealing with the consumer. So the first classification is the universal agent. The universal agent, we're going to liken that to full power of attorney. We generally get full power of attorney over like elderly parents, for example. If you give somebody full power of attorney, they're making financial decisions for you, medical decisions for you. This is the highest classification of an agency relationship. The universal agent in a real estate transaction is the purple unicorn. How often do y'all see a purple unicorn out and about in the real world, in nature? How often do you see one? Try as we might, we don't see purple unicorns. Think this through. The agency relationship is between the client and whom? And I can see your mouths move, the firm. Think it through. Are you going to give Keller Williams full power? Are you going to give Coldwell Banker, Allen Tate, full power? No, not even a little bit. What we would be saying if they had this is they could sell your house without you. They could buy a house without you. We do not practice the universal agent in a real estate transaction. Again, the closest thing I have to this in the real world is that full power of attorney. So the universal agent in a real estate transaction is not going to happen. Full power. The next classification is called the general agent. The general agent has some power. They have some ability to act on behalf of somebody else. In real estate, we have two examples of the general agent. The first is the property manager. The property manager has been hired by the owner to manage their property. You're collecting rent, you're collecting security deposits, you're making repairs. How much are you making repairs, or how often are you making repairs? Well, that has to be agreed upon between you and the owner, between the property manager and the owner. You have some power. For example, the property management agreement may say that the property manager can make all repairs on the property up to $500. So you have some power. If something breaks and it's $499, you can run out and fix it. If something breaks and it's $501, you've lost your power. You need to communicate with your owner. Does that make sense? You get some power as a property manager. How much power do you get? It's in your property management agreement. Property management is coming in Unit 12, so we'll talk more about that. The other example of the general agent is the individual broker's relationship with their firm. Whatever firm you affiliate with, you'll be allowed to do certain things on behalf of your firm. That makes you a general agent. What will you be able to do with your affiliated firm or on behalf of your affiliated firm? That's your agreement between you and the firm. That comes in your employment contract, which we will talk more about. I'll tell you a great example of your power, your general agent with your affiliated firm. I think we're good at this, but remind me one more time. The agency agreement is between the client and who? The firm. The firm is an entity. The firm is a business. The firm needs a body to sign that agency agreement for them. As the individual agent, we sign agency agreements on behalf of our firm. Why do we get to do that? Because we're a general agent with our firm. We have some power. So if the universal agent has full power, the general agent has some power, the special agent has no power whatsoever. The special agent is the sales agent. The special agent is the one working with buyers and sellers. May that be residential or commercial. The special agent is the sales agent, and I have zero power to bind. I have zero power to make decisions. I cannot speak for my buyers and sellers. I only speak on their behalf. I'm middleman when it comes to communicating. I'm getting the information from my client to whomever. There it is. So the special agent is the sales agent. I would use, you got examples of the general agent, the special agent. Most of us on this call, I imagine, are going into residential sales. Remember what we've been saying all along, you guys. We are fact finders. I'm not here to tell you what to do and what decision to make and how to buy this house. My job is to provide you the information so you can make an informed decision. And if we were to put our classification of agency into pictures, the universal is filled up. The general has some power. The special agent is down there on E, no power whatsoever. Questions on these? Also, 149, we define some more words. Again, understanding the basics, the definitions of the words as we get into these conversations. Brokerage is the idea of bringing buyers and sellers together in an open and fair market. What we do every day, helping sellers sell and buyers buy, we're brokeraging the deal. We are bringing people together for the common purpose of this transaction. The broker is the individual. North Carolina, we are all brokers. Some states use a sales associate. North Carolina, we are all brokers. What we have is different classifications, different levels of brokers. We will talk about those levels as we go. Commission is what we get paid when it closes. There is a difference that is spelled out in our agency agreement. There's a difference in when I earn my commission versus when we actually get paid. Here's the dark side of real estate. We typically don't get paid until it closes. So what if it never closes? What if the buyer's in breach and the contract terminates? Are we going to get paid? I'm not saying you won't. Typically, we get paid when it closes. If it never closes, it might be hard to collect your commission. Now, before we get all excited, because can we not sue the buyer? Remember, whose commission is it? It's the firm's. So can you, the individual, sue the buyer? Nah, you don't have any kind of agreement with them. The firm does. Is the firm going to sue the buyer? I don't know. I'm not your firm. Maybe they have it in a policy to do so. Maybe they don't. Maybe the firm doesn't want to have the reputation of suing buyers at the drop of a hat. Typically speaking, when we earn our commission and when we get paid are two different things. Again, we'll see those in our agency agreements. And then the cooperating broker. If you're cooperating with another broker, it's a broker with a different firm. It's not uncommon to have one firm represent the seller and a different firm represent the buyer. Even though we have two different agenda, we're two different firms, we are cooperating on this transaction. We are coming together because it's in the best interest of our clients. You can compare a cooperating broker to an in-house transaction. In-house transaction means both buyer and seller are coming from the same firm. We do not have a cooperating firm. One firm is helping in the same transaction. And again, we are getting there, trying to build anticipation. In North Carolina, there are certain activities required. If you're doing all three of these activities, you must have a license. And these activities, list, lease, buy, exchange, auction, negotiate, or sell, is all about the transfer of real property. They're all about brokeraging a deal for others for compensation. And understand and always remember, all three pieces are required. There it is. All three pieces are required to have a license. The brokerage, the transfer of real property for others for compensation. And by the way, when we say compensation, most often we're talking about money, but I don't want you to think it's only about money. Compensation is anything of value. In exchange for free rent, is free rent something of value? Yeah. In exchange for a week at my beach house, is that something of value? So don't get stuck that, and it may not be valuable to you, but it is something of value. So don't get stuck that compensation is only money. It's anything of value. All three activities are required. When you see these test questions, I need you to stop and ask yourself, are we engaged in the transfer of real property for others for compensation? And if you say yes 3 times, then in North Carolina, you need a real estate license. So let's see. I know we just a few minutes ago talked about the for sale by owner. The for sale by owner is not doing it for others. They're doing it for themselves. They're selling their own property. They are the owner of record. Does the FSBO need a real estate license? No, because we have to have all three activities. What if your sister wants to rent an apartment? She wants you to help her and she's not going to pay you anything. You're not going to get a lunch from her. You're not going to get anything. Do you have to have a license to help her? No, because you're not doing it for anything of value. Lunch is something of value. Is everybody hearing me? I mean, especially when you're hungry, and lunch ain't cheap these days, y'all. You've been to lunch lately? What happened there, right? So anything of value. And the question I need you guys to ask yourselves is, are we looking at the transfer of real property, these activities? Some like to remember LL Beans: list, lease, buy, exchange, auction, negotiate, and sell. Real property for others for compensation. And in North Carolina, if all three, we must have a license. How we create agency relationships. Again, the agency agreements that we use, we have our exclusive right to sell listing agreement that we're looking at in Unit 8. We have our buyer agency agreement, also in Unit 8. We also have a property management agency agreement. These are our agency agreements. And the agency agreements are what create the relationship between the firm and the client. So one we talk about most often, most common, but there are some other forms of agency relationships that can exist outside of the sales transaction or the property management transaction. You're going to have a relationship with your firm. When you affiliate with your firm, you will have a relationship with them. Your firm more than likely will come with some kind of employment contract, independent contractor agreement, some kind of commitment between you and your firm. I know this sounds funny, but especially you guys as brand new, please make sure you read that thing before you sign it. Know what you are signing up for. And if you have questions, I need you to ask before you sign. We're going to talk again a little bit more about your relationship with your firm in just a bit. Bear with me. We also have a cooperation agreement. Remember, we just defined a cooperating broker, cooperating firm, two firms coming together and working. Once something is listed in our listing services, referred to as the multiple listing services or the MLS, the listing firm tells the selling firm how much they're going to pay them when you bring me this ready, willing, and able buyer. You, the public, don't see that. That's only something we see when we log on our back end site. So I get a buyer that wants to see 123 Main Street. First thing I'm going to do is go into MLS, make sure it's available, get that information. But I'm also going to look and see how much is the listing firm willing to cooperate with me? How much are they willing to pay me for bringing me this ready, willing, bringing them this ready, willing, and able buyer? And that's our cooperation agreement between different firms. Again, more on all that coming in Unit 8. We could also create an agency relationship by the conduct of the parties, the action, that's implied agency. You guys remember when we defined express versus implied? We said express, the terms are clearly stated, compared to implied, where it's just based on your actions. In North Carolina, implied agency is never allowed. You can't just start acting like somebody's agent without explaining to them what it means. All of our agency agreements are express, which means the terms have been clearly stated. The scope of our authority, what am I allowed to do? What am I authorized to do? Again, what we're looking for here is that express. I want those terms clearly laid out. I want to know specifically, what is my lane? What is the speed limit within my lane? That's an express agreement. Those are our agency agreements. We do have an opportunity in one case to proceed under an oral agency agreement. At first, we will talk about that. I can proceed under an oral agency agreement as long as the terms have been clearly laid out. That's the idea of express. Maybe it's in writing, maybe it's oral. The point is that the terms have been clearly laid out. Again, compare express to implied. You just start acting like somebody's agent without having a conversation with them about helping them understand what that means. And we do it. You guys will do it too. Us, we brokers, we run around all the time talking about my buyer and my seller. Well, we now know that's not true. They're not mine, are they? They're the firm's. But if you're running around saying that, hopefully it's because you have created, it's created on purpose. It doesn't just happen. And then the other scope of authority, my parameters. There's something called apparent authority. This falls more on the principal. So apparent authority says where you've explained your agency duties and the principal asks you to speed, or the principal asks you to change lanes. It's not their job to know my job. It's my job to know my job. It's my job to know my lane and my speed limit. However, if I explain this to them and they say, well, you can just do it for me, that's fine. That's okay. You can just do that for me. That's called apparent authority, and that's not allowed. No principal, no customer can make you change lanes. Nobody can make you speed. Is everybody with me? Let's say, for example, you have sellers, and at the beginning of your relationship, you tell them, I cannot accept, reject, or counter an offer on your behalf. Who can remind me which offers I present to my sellers? Which ones? I hope you guys are as loud as you are animated. Make your family wonder what we're doing in here. We present all offers to our sellers, all of them, each and every single one of them. So let's say you tell the sellers at the beginning. So I have a duty, every offer that comes in, I must run it by you. And they say, awesome, sounds good. Fast forward, and now they're going to go on a 5-day international cruise where they're going to be off the grid. They're going to be out of touch. And they look at you and say, anything that comes in over X amount, just go ahead and accept it on my behalf. We'll sign it when we land. Can you do that? Thank you all for shaking your head no. That is apparent authority. They know my parameters and they're asking me to go beyond that. Again, guys, it is never their job to know my job. However, we do need to go over certain things with them and something like that. So the scope of our authority just tells us kind of the parameters. Again, this is important. All agency agreements, all of them are express agreements. Implied, not allowed. Apparent, definitely not allowed. It's all express, meaning the terms have been clearly stated. Just enough to tease you about your commission briefly in Unit 7. My loyalty is to the one that hires me. That may or may not be the one that pays me. My loyalty, who gets old car, who gets first class, it's the one that enters into an agency agreement with me. So back to our scenario, you're a buyer's agent. Your buyer becomes interested in a for sale by owner. Who's your client? Buyer, they're the one that hired you. Buyer's interested in a FSBO. So you reach out to the FSBO on behalf of your buyer. And one of the early questions you're going to ask that FSBO is, will you pay me? Will you compensate me when this closes? The FSBO can answer one of two ways. They can either say, yes, I am, or no, I'm not. If the FSBO agrees to pay you, where is your loyalty?
The buyer.
To your buyer,
Right.
because they are the one. Thank you, Rochelle. And I saw several mouths move, but not as many as I wanted to see. Your loyalty is to the buyer, not because they're not paying you, but because they're the ones that hired you. If the FSBO wanted that loyalty and obedience and confidentiality, then they should have hired an agent, not gone it alone. It's like that. So my loyalty is to the one that hires me. And, you know, also my loyalty, you guys, all you got to do is enter into an agency agreement with me. You get loyalty, you get old car. Price point doesn't matter. The buyer that wants to buy a $5,000 tract of land gets old car when they hire me. The seller that wants to sell the $1 million listing gets old car when they hire me. Price point doesn't matter. The only way we can get you paid, the only way we can guarantee commission is to get those agency agreements in writing. I did mention earlier that we have the opportunity to work under an oral agency agreement, but I also said at first, when we get there, there is a definite time that eventually we've got to put that thing in writing. And one of the big reasons to put it in writing is to make sure you get paid. It's the only way we can protect our commission is if we have that written agency agreement. So all I'm going to say about commission right now, because trust me, we've got a lot more coming in Unit 8. All good things come to an end, right? Agency doesn't last forever. So at some point we will terminate or end agency. There's a nice list for us on page 152. Let's look at that. Page 152. What are the things that can end agency? Well, completion or fulfillment of the purpose for which agency was created. If you enter into an exclusive right to sell listing agreement, you're being hired to market and advertise and sell this person's home. Once that home is sold, once the deed conveys, you've done the job you were hired to do, right? Same thing with the buyer agency agreement. You're being hired to help them select and purchase an acceptable property. Once they buy, once that deed changes hands, you've done the job that you've been hired to do. Good job. So completion of purposes will terminate agency. An expiration date. All of our written agency agreements must have a definite end date. We agree, we're gonna work together for so long. We'll talk about that. And when it's over, it's over. Shake your head, yes or no. Could we agree to extend it? Of course. Of course. If we enter into a 2-week or a 2-month relationship and we know that we like each other and we want to continue, can we extend it? Sure. But unless we agree otherwise, and the agency agreements actually say 11:59 p.m. on fill in the date. So it's very specific about when, the end of the day. So when it expires, mutual agreement to terminate. Two parties, the client and the firm, agreed to enter into this agency agreement. Either party can agree to get out. Remember though, whose client is it? The firm. So can you, the individual, fire your buyer? It's not your buyer. Can you, the individual, let the seller out of their listing agreement? It's not your seller. So the firm would have to be the one to let them out. It would be up to your BIC, your broker in charge, mutual agreement. Breach of either party. If either party breaches, again, these agency agreements are very specific about the firm's duties to the principal and the principal's duties to the firm. And if either party does or doesn't do what they say they will or will not do, they're in breach. Our agency agreement also specifies the consequences of breach. What happens if either party breach? That could terminate an agency agreement. Operation of law. Remember back in Unit 5, we talked about some examples when the judge could take the property, maybe bankruptcy, foreclosure, eminent domain, adverse possession. If the court takes the property, it's no longer the seller's to sell. And that would terminate the agency agreement. Destruction or condemnation of the property. I mean, if the house burns down, that's the product I'm selling. If the house burns down, I no longer have a product to sell. Now I might be able to relist and sell the land, right? But that would be a different agreement because it's a different property. But typically destruction or condemnation of the property. And then death or incapacity of either party. Remember, the relationship is between the client and the firm. If the individual broker passes away, the show goes on. The firm would have to shut its doors. That's what we mean by death of a firm. So if the client passes away or the firm dies, that would terminate the agency agreement. Questions so far? So I need to go off textbook for just a second. Everybody with me? We're going to go off book for just 1 second. We're going to refer to some information from the syllabus, make sure we cover everything. With this termination of agency, there are some exceptions. Once agency ends, if you have any outstanding promises or obligations out there, you still have a duty to fulfill those. Once you make a promise, you're in. If our agency agreement expires while we're under contract, common courtesy says I'm still going to get my guys through this transaction. I'm going to get you to closing. I got you this far. I'm going to get you to closing. A best practice would be to do an agency renewal to get us through closing. That may be up to your firm's policy. The commission doesn't require the agency renewal, but that's just a best practice. And then after agency ends, assuming this transaction didn't close, you learned something about these people during your time together. And now this doesn't close, agency ends, you still can't use what you know about them to benefit yourself. We never can self-deal. Because let's say for the sellers, you know darn well why they're selling. You know, because, I mean, they're getting ready to go through a nasty divorce and They can't stand to be under the same roof with each other. They got to get away from each other as soon as they possibly can. We play marriage counselor too sometimes. Real estate agents, we wear many, many hats. Stay in your lane. So you know all this information and you know their motivation. You know why they're dying to sell, why they're just itching to sell. They have to sell right now. For whatever reason, it doesn't sell, it expires. You can't use that information against them to benefit yourself. No self-dealing ever. The other thing to address when our agency agreement ends is this duty of confidentiality. When agency ends, when agency is terminated, you do not have a golden ticket to run up and down the street blabbing their confidential information. For the most part, once agency ends, we're going to continue that confidentiality. That's just the humane thing to do, right? So it's not like you're going to run up and down the streets blabbing, divorce, relocating, you're still going to keep their confidential information unless you bring the other party into the transaction. For example, you take on a listing. You have that listing on the market for 5 months. Within 5 months, you don't sell it. I don't know why. Maybe it's overpriced. I don't know why. But for whatever reason, 5 months, you don't sell it. That listing expires. Those sellers relist with another firm. So now the sellers are back on the market with firm XYZ. You have a buyer client that becomes interested in that property that 2 weeks ago, you were the listing agent. You have a buyer client. Who's your loyalty to today? Yeah, say it, Rochelle, I'm sorry. Your buyer. That's right. You guys need to stop and ask yourself in situations like this, who is my loyalty to today? Not yesterday, but today. So if you bring the buyer client to that transaction, your buyer, your client, and they get confidential. So all that stuff you learned about the seller during the 5 months you had it listed, why they want to sell and their motivation and how low they're willing to go, you owe it to your buyer. Think about this. Today, the buyer's your client. The seller is now your customer. That one bumps on our moral compass a little, I think a little bit. But if we think about old car and those duties that we owe our buyers and seller clients, we need to stop and ask ourselves in some occasions, what is my agency relationship today? The other thing I think is worth mentioning, sellers don't have to accept any offer. They don't have to take anything. So my buyers make an offer, that offer comes through, they're going to see Julie Campbell on there. And they're going to say, my gosh, I thought we were done with that girl. 5 months out of our lives. And now here she's popping back up. They may see that and know what I know about them. And probably my buyer's lowball offer, let's face it, and they don't have to accept that offer. I can't tell them if they do or not, but I'm telling you guys, if they're really against working with me again, because they know what I know about them, they have the option to reject our offer. They have that decision to make. I have a duty to my buyer to present that offer on their behalf. They have a decision to make if they want to accept it or not. What are our thoughts on this? Yeah.
It is your duty also to let your buyers know that you have worked with this client and if you left with good term or not, right?
Yeah. Well, I don't know about good terms or not, but anything that it could aid them in decision making on this train. I mean, I'm not going to run around. I'm not going to talk junk about them. That's not professional. But anything I know that could aid my buyer's decision, that could, affect what they want to offer, how they want to counter offer anything. I have a duty now to share that with my buyer. Remember, I tell my client everything about my customer. I tell my customer nothing about my client. And again, the question is, who's everybody's role? Where is everybody on my plane today? Not yesterday and not tomorrow, but right here, right now. And that's the question to ask. Somebody said it could get complicated. Yeah, it could. So Benjamin, to your point, I would have to say, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, I know for a fact, this is why the sellers are selling. I know for a fact, this is how low they're willing to go. Could something have changed from when I listed it? Of course, but this is what I knew then. Isn't that something? This is what old car is about, you guys. Somebody's going to get old car today. You may not get it tomorrow, but this is what you get today in our agency agreement while we are in an agency agreement. Okay. Food for thought. Let's take 10. We come back. We're getting into our agency relationships. we're back. How we doing? Check in. Thumbs ups? 2 thumbs ups? Good, good. Good, good, good. All right. So cameras are on. And I am taking attendance. All right. You guys go ahead and set your chats. Private message. I've got a question for you guys. You got your private chat set just to me? So in a private chat, please tell me A, B, C, or D. Everybody in? So the fiduciary obligations of the agent, who gets fiduciary? The one that hires me. How do you hire me? You enter into a written agency agreement with me. Either you're my client or you're my customer. My loyalty is not to the one who pays me. It's not to all. Maybe it is to all. We'll talk about that. It's not the one that calls me. It's the one that hires me. So where we are now, we're on page 153, and we're going to talk about some different agency relationships. Understand, the real estate commission sets the parameters. The firm decides how they want to operate. So these are the options that the firm has. For some reason, this section upsets you guys. I don't know why, but why would a firm do that? I don't know, but they can. These are the parameters that they can choose to work. If you're really, really anti one of these, I suggest not affiliating with that firm. Go find a firm that practices the agency relationship that you agree with. But to have this conversation with our agency relationships, let me introduce you to cast of characters. I am the broker in charge of our firm. You are all licensed, and guess what? You're going to come work for me. Welcome aboard. It's good to have you guys. We're all going to be affiliated with Julie's Real Estate Shop. One of you may get to be the listing agent. One of you may get to be the selling agent. We got buyers and sellers we're working with. And then, of course, it's not just us. There are other firms out there. So we're going to walk through these different agency relationships with us being the firm being Julie's Real Estate Shop. And we're going to talk about how these look, and more importantly, the duties and the obligations owed to the buyer and the seller in each. Remember too, you guys, just as a reminder, if you're represented, you are hired by the firm. If you are represented, you are hired by a firm. If you're unrepresented, that you are not hired by a firm. You're not hired by Julie's Real Estate Shop. And then remember too, I say FSBO. There it is in writing for the first time, I think. The for sale by owner is the FSBO. I try really hard. We love our acronyms in real estate, so I try really hard not to use them until I introduce them to you. So a couple different agency options, the agency relationships that firms may or may not choose to work. And the first option is a single agency firm. And there are some firms out there that will only work with sellers. So in seller agency only firms, it's just like it sounds. The only client these firms have are sellers. If a buyer comes to them wanting to buy one of their listings or wanting to buy any listing for that matter, the buyers are customers. Seller agency only firms will never have buyer clients. That's the way they're set up. So if you think about what we're saying, what we're telling the seller in this case, as long as you're my seller, you're my client. But as soon as you sell that house and want to buy another one, want to buy a home, I got to downgrade you, right? I got to move you from first class to coach because we're not going to have any buyer clients. So a Julie's Real Estate Shop is a seller agent's firm. We got the firm with our seller on the same side of the line. There is our seller. One of you will get to be the listing agent. You're the ones that working most closely with the seller. The rest of us are here by default. The buyer is over here either unrepresented or represented by another firm. The point here is that they are not represented by Julie's Real Estate Shop. The only people that can hire me, us, are sellers. Single agency, specifically seller agency. Flip that coin. You have firms that only represent buyers. Sellers don't hire them. They don't take on listings. They have buyer clients only. So the only property I can show you is either that listed by other firms or the for sale by owner, because I don't have any of my own listings. We're only taking on buyer clients. So again, what are we saying to the buyer? As long as you're buying, you can be my client. But if you ever want to sell that house, I'm going to have to downgrade you, or in this case, refer you to a firm up the street. Refer you to a firm that will take sellers. So if we look at our picture, now we got Julie's Real Estate Shop. One of you is the selling agent. Allow you to stand there hand in hand with our buyer. Either the seller is represented by another firm or the seller has chosen to go it alone for sale by owner. Again, the point here, they're not represented by Julie's Real Estate Shop. So you had a firm that only works with seller clients. You had a firm that only works with buyer clients. You may have a firm that works with both sellers and buyer clients, but only one per transaction. So basically, the first one to hire the firm is the one that gets to be the client. The other one is the customer. So we'll work with both, but we're only ever going to work with one or the other. So I got two pictures for this one, depending on what side we're on. So again, Julie's Real Estate Shop, we're on the listing side with the seller. Buyer's either represented by another firm or they're chosen to go it alone, unrepresented, or Julie's Real Estate Shop is hanging out over here with the buyer. One of you is the selling agent. The seller is either represented by another firm or they're going for sale by owner. Those three that we just ran through are single agency, meaning we're only ever going to have one client. Questions on single agency? Besides, why would anybody do that? I don't know. Yeah. I do think we see this. This is more common in our more rural areas. Once you get away from the big cities, kind of more boutique, niche kind of places. We have an instructor here with Carolina School of Real Estate, and she's got a real estate firm. She lives down in Troy, around Lake Tillery. She works for a firm. She has a firm that only represents sellers. That's pretty rural down there. That's their niche, their boutique, if you will. Another type of agency relationship is something called subagency. And before I flip the slide, I need everybody to understand that subagency can come in one of two different forms. So let's talk about the first form of subagency, the one that we see the most often, the one that we see every single day, the one that's implied by this slide. Subagency, that prefix sub means under. So a subagent, an agent of an agent. And the form of this that we see every single day, when one of us gets a listing, guess what? In a sense, we all get a listing. Because whose listing is it? It's mine. It is Julie's Real Estate Shop. So when one of you get a listing, I let one of you work with my seller. I let one of you work with my buyers. Everybody with me? The rest of you are here by default. The rest of you are over hanging out just under Julie's Real Estate Shop because we are of the same firm. Now, I just looked up, who do I want to pick on? I just looked up and saw Suzanne. Suzanne, I'm going to pick on you. So I let Suzanne be my listing agent. There you go, Suzanne. You get a listing. You got the seller. You brought this business. I'm going to let you be the listing agent. What do you guys think? Does Suzanne get to boss you guys around? Does Suzanne get to tell you guys what to do? Does she get to make you get her copies and get ready for her open house on Sunday? Sorry, Suzanne. No, because Suzanne has nothing over you guys whatsoever. She's the one that I allow to be my listing agent. The rest of you, by default, are subagents because you're an agent of the firm. Now, what if Suzanne leaves? Suzanne goes, she has the audacity to go to a different firm. Don't worry, she'll be back. She has the audacity to go to a different firm. What do you guys think? Can she take that listing with her? Is it her listing? No. Whose is it? Mine. It's up to the firm. Each firm has their own policy on whether or not Suzanne can take that listing when she goes to a different firm. Let's say my firm, no, she can't. So when Suzanne leaves, I'm going to reassign it to another one of you because you are all agents of mine. You're an agent of the firm. That's one form of subagency. Happens every day, all day, every day. Same thing with the buyers. When one of us gets a buyer, in a sense, we all get a buyer. Now, you guys aren't out showing properties and all that stuff. There's only one of you doing that. But we all owe that duty and loyalty to my buyer. So first form of subagency. Question on that. When one of us gets a client, we all get a client. The second form of subagency can get a little bit more tricky. So clean your slate, erase your slate. The second form of subagency, let me back up for a second. We all owe our principal the same duty. When I wake up every morning, I have a duty to all of the sellers in the Triad MLS. And my duty to all of those sellers is to find them a ready, willing, and able buyer. That's my job, is to connect buyer and seller, not just any buyer, but a ready, willing, and able buyer. Liken this to a three-legged stool. Ready, willing, and able. What happens if one of those legs falls out? stool topples over, right? I need all three legs for the stool to stand up. And that's my job. When I wake up every day, that's what I'm out doing, is trying to find all these sellers, this ready, willing, and able buyer. There's something called seller sub-agency, which is what we see the most. There's also something called buyer sub-agency, which we don't see that much. But with seller sub-agency, I'm not necessarily telling you where I'm going to get this buyer from. Maybe it's my buyer client. Maybe it's a buyer customer. In seller sub-agency, that ready, willing, and able buyer is unrepresented. For whatever reason, this buyer didn't want to hire any firm. They didn't want to hire Julie's Real Estate Shop. They didn't want to hire anybody, firm ABC, firm XYZ. The buyer chose to go unrepresented. The buyer chose to be a customer. And this second form of sub-agency, specifically seller sub-agency, I can bring a buyer customer to the transaction as long as the listing firm and the seller will allow it. Put yourself in the seller's shoes. Does the seller care where the buyer comes from? They just want that ready, willing, and able buyer. They don't care if they're a client or a customer. Do they come with an agent? They don't really care about all that. What they care about is, can this person buy my house? Can they financially do it? Are they able to do it? Are they willing to do it? And in this form of seller sub-agency, the buyer is the customer. They have chosen to be unrepresented. This is the key. Maybe the agent working as a seller sub-agent, maybe the agent is with Julie's Real Estate Shop. Maybe they're with a different firm. Doesn't matter. What we're saying here is that the buyer is unrepresented. The buyer chose to go it alone. Now, I know why. Why would anybody choose to go alone? I got some answers for you. I think the investor that buys 12 homes a year, they know what they're doing. And in a lot of cases, they do more business than the average real estate agent. Not average, some real estate agents. That investor doesn't really need representation. What they need is the paperwork, which we come with. They need access to get in the front door every once in a while. They're basically using us, right? They don't need us. They just need the few things. They do this enough. They know the process. They know what they're doing. I think most first-time home buyers, or those buyers that buy, once or twice in their life, I think they will want to go represented. I think the buyer investor is a great example of the one that they know what they're doing. They don't need this. I'll be honest. Another reason why buyers may not hire an agent, why they may choose to go unrepresented, is if our delivery is poor. If I don't sound like I understand agency and I don't sound like I know what I'm talking about, is somebody going to be eager to sign a piece of paper to hire me? So I think our delivery, I think some of it might be our delivery. If you can't communicate your benefits to this buyer and why they should hire you, you may leave them wondering just that. Why should I hire this person? There's so many reasons why buyers choose to go unrepresented. Get this in your mind right now. People buy and sell houses all day, every day without us. There's no requirement for anybody to hire a real estate agent. I got to show them my value. I got to show them what I bring to the table and why they are should be willing to hire me. And this is why we do things like listing appointments and buyer consultations, so we can show our services. And at the end, they have a choice to make. Either they hire us or they don't. Either way, I can still put you in my plane. I can still get you through the transaction. So as a seller sub-agent, the buyer's unrepresented, the buyer's the customer. Again, maybe you're with the same firm as the listing company, maybe you're not. We don't see this form of seller sub-agency as much anymore. We're seeing it less and less and less because there's risks on both sides. First off, you got a non-represented buyer. You got somebody going through the transaction not represented. As far as the listing firm or the seller, they don't have to allow seller sub-agency. They have the right to say buyer agents only. They have the right to say only agents with a buyer client can show my listing, can bring me an offer. The reason why the listing firm and the seller may refuse to allow seller sub-agency, they may refuse to allow you to bring your buyer customer, is something called vicarious liability. Have you guys ever heard the expression living vicariously through somebody else? You're living like through their eyes, like through their actions. In seller sub-agency, you may have a case where the seller sub-agent is bringing their buyer customer. That seller sub-agent is with a different firm. You don't know this agent. You don't know what kind of training they've had. You don't know what their ethical conduct is. You know absolutely nothing about this person. But when we agree to do seller sub-agency, we agree to let this stranger hang out over here with us. And if they mess up, we could be held liable. Not just the firm, but also the seller could be held liable for their actions. So a big reason why we're not seeing this version of seller sub-agency anymore is because of that vicarious liability. Let's look at our pictures. I got two scenarios here. So you got Julie's Real Estate Shop. We're representing the seller. One of you is acting as the listing agent. This buyer chose to go it alone. They chose to be unrepresented. Another one of you in the firm could proceed to assist this buyer as a seller's sub-agent. You're not hanging out over here with the buyer. You're hanging out over here with the seller. Who's your loyalty to? The seller. As a seller sub-agent, is it in your seller's best interest to write up and present an offer on behalf of this buyer? Is it in your seller's best interest to assist this buyer to get him to close so the seller can sell? Anything you do, everything you do is for the best interest of the seller, not the buyer. They chose to go unrepresented. So there's one scenario where the seller sub-agent is with Julie's Real Estate Shop. The other scenario, again, I got the listing. One of you is the listing agent. We could have a seller sub-agent with a different firm. The seller didn't hire the different firm, but we allowed them to hang out over here with us. And if that seller sub-agent messes up, vicarious liability says the firm and the seller could be held liable. The buyer is the customer. The buyer is unrepresented, and whether or not you're allowed to bring them is up to the listing firm and the seller. It's covered in our listing agreement that we'll see in Unit 8. Think of unrepresented. I always think of represented or unrepresented if you ever had to go stand in front of a judge. I've never had to stand in front of a judge, but just thinking about that makes me shake a little bit. If you ever had to go stand in front of a judge, if you go represented, you have an attorney by your side. If you go unrepresented, you are standing in front of that judge all by yourself. And it's the same idea in a real estate transaction. If you're represented, you have an agent, arm to arm, hand to hand, guiding, in some cases, carrying you through this transaction. If you go unrepresented, oh, I'm still there. I'm side by side. But you're going to have to carry your own bags. You're going to have to carry your own weight. I'm not going to do that for you. That's the difference in old car versus owing somebody honesty, fairness, and the disclosure of material facts. This is the difference in a client and a customer being represented or unrepresented. Seller subagent. It's in the name, you guys. If you are allowed to be a seller subagent, who's your loyalty? The seller. I don't care why this buyer didn't hire you. Maybe you're poor, it's your delivery. Maybe, like we said, it's that investor. Maybe they come from another state and they think they know agency and they don't need you to tell them North Carolina. For whatever reason, they don't hire you. They choose to be unrepresented. You can proceed as a seller subagent if the seller and the listing firm will allow it. Questions? As a broker, when you look in the listing services and the multiple listing services, you're working with this buyer. Maybe they're your client, maybe they're customer. Either way, you have a buyer that wants to go see 123 Main Street. So the first thing you're going to do is go into your listing services and you're going to look up 123 Main Street. Part of that cooperation between firms that we talked about, the listing service also has to dictate if they will be willing to work with a subagent. And you will see in the list service that they will allow a buyer's agent or both, seller subagent and a buyer's agent. If the listing, you're looking it up, if the listing says buyer agent only, you, the seller subagent, cannot take your buyer. You can't even show the property. They don't want you coming in the front door unless you're bringing a buyer client. So you don't have to spend your time. The MLS, the listing service, will tell you. And when you're trying to get this buyer to hire you, isn't that a great, catch? Hey, if you don't hire me, we're limited on the properties that we see. We can't see everything listed because we got to get permission that comes in the form of the listing service. So if it says buyer agent only, now if it says both, they're saying bring your buyer client, bring your buyer customer, bring a buyer. And remember what we said too, you guys. Typically, the seller pays the listing firm shares their commission with whomever's bringing the buyer. So if this says both, they are offering you compensation both as a buyer's agent and as a seller subagent. So as a seller subagent, I don't want you to worry about getting paid as long as the listing service agrees to pay you. That's why we have that cooperation agreement. That's why we have that relationship where we can pool our listings together. The buyer is the customer. So important. Please write that down. Seller subagency. The buyer is the customer. What questions do we have?
Would it be more common to see a seller subagency as opposed to a buyer subagency?
Yes. Yes. The only scenario I can think of with buyer subagency would be scenario number one. If one of us gets a buyer, then we all get a buyer. Because otherwise, if we were looking at this scenario, the only possibility here, you'd have the buyer client. Yeah, you'd have the buyer client with a for sale by owner. That would be that. And then the FSBO has to agree, you know, to let you in or not. If they're going to pay you or not. I mean, they'll let you in, but whether or not they're going to pay you. Seller subagent is what I want you guys to focus on. Because the name, again, it's all there. The seller didn't hire you. The seller hired Julie's Real Estate Shop. But the seller in Julie's Real Estate Shop allowed you to hang out over here. And everything you do as a seller subagent is because it's in the best interest of the seller. So that buyer customer looks at you and says, how much should I offer? You going to tell them to come in under asking price? Is that what's best for the seller? No, we're going to have them come in at least at asking price, if not more, depending on the market, right? That buyer customer looks at you and says, do you think I should get a home inspection? Does the seller want the buyer to get a home inspection? No, the home inspector's job is to go in the house and find problems, right? The home inspector's not going to come in and tell you what a lovely home it is. Their job is to come in and look for problems. So do you think the seller wants the buyer to get a home inspection? So when that buyer customer looks at you and says, should I get a home inspection? Your answer is, don't do it, because that's what's in the best interest of the person that lets you hang out over here with them. My only job as a seller subagent is to get everybody to the finish line in the best interest of the seller. Nobody has hired the seller subagent in this scenario. They're allowing you to hang out over here with them. Let me back up for a second. You guys remember, I guess last week, we talked about that transactional broker. Remember, in order for us to be involved, somebody's got to be hired. In this case, the buyer didn't hire anybody, but the seller did. Somebody's got to be a client. Maybe they're your client, maybe they're not, but somebody is a client. So this is not a transactional broker. So this is allowed. Again, you guys, we are seeing this less and less and less, but it's still out there. I still see seller subagency. And actually, I kind of fibbed a few minutes ago. Confession time. Because actually what MLS says is buyer agent only, seller subagent only, or both. If somebody's putting seller subagent only, they don't understand. Because if you say seller subagent only, what you're saying is buyer customers only. Don't bring me your buyer clients. Why would we not want buyer clients? I actually ran across this. I do compliance for my firm. I love doing compliance. Like I'm the one that gets to say the file is complete, you can get paid. That's me. I get to say that. And I am true. Some days my agents do not like me. But I was reviewing a file one day. It was somebody else's listing. And I happened to notice in MLS, we had a buyer client, we had a buyer agency agreement. And I happened to notice in MLS, it said seller subagent only. And I went to my agent. I said, you need to make sure that they're going to pay us. Because as it stands right now, if I bring my buyer client, are they obligated to pay me? No, because they're only offering compensation and to work with seller subagent. She said, well, what do I do? I said, you call the agent, tell her she's got to fix her listing because I want to make sure we're going to get paid. They could have easily, oh, they fixed it. They don't like me now either, but they could have easily come back after the transaction and said, we only offer compensation to seller subagent. Again, if you see that, it's a mistake. But wouldn't saying no to a home inspection contradict the honesty responsibility that we have for the customer? I'm being honest. You asked me a question. By the way, I told you when you chose not to hire me, I told you there's just, I have the best interest of the seller. And it's pretty honest when I say, no, buyers don't have to have a home inspection. I'm allowed to hang out over here with the seller, and that's whose best interest I have. No is a pretty honest answer. Would it be in my best interest? Well, that might be a different question now, right? It's all in the wording. What else? Seller sub-agency. Take a second with it.
Julie, so the seller sub-agent
Mhm.
from a different firm is getting paid by Julie's shop.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. The seller pays me. And then if I agree to do seller sub-agency, I will share some of my commission with whomever brings the buyer. So even though you're bringing a buyer customer, if we agree to do seller sub-agency, I'm willing to, and that's why I want you to look in listing service to make sure that they're willing to compensate you. Because what they're saying, if they're not willing to pay you, what they're saying is you're not welcome. But if they are willing to pay you, then I'm going to share my commission with you. I'm going to share that compensation. I think that's a common concern when you guys first hear about seller sub-agent. I don't want to work for free. Simmer down. Simmer down. Nobody's going to ask you to work for free. But if the listing service says buyer agent only, it's not that they're not willing to compensate you. What they're saying is, we don't even want you to bring this buyer customer. No showings. Don't bring a buyer to my front door unless they're a client. And take that a step further, and no, I'm not paying you. I'm only offering compensation to buyer's agents. We'll look at our listing agreement and it breaks down. It says, how much does the listing firm expect to collect, the total commission? And then we take it a step further and say, of my total commission, this is how much I'm willing to share with a buyer's agent. And this is how much, if any, I'm willing to share with a seller sub-agent. So we break it down. It's an agreement between the firm and the seller. Some firms have a policy not to do this, and that's fine. They can, but they need to explain that to the seller, because the seller needs to know that the buyers might be limited. Sellers want the biggest pool of buyers. They want all the buyers. And if you're going to limit that pool, they have a right to know why. And they may choose not to hire you because you're limiting that pool. Is that negotiable at all? Yes, it is negotiable. How negotiable is it? That's going to be up to the firm's policy. So when you affiliate with your firm, they're going to tell you, like one of the first things they're going to do with you guys is sit down with the agency agreements and say, this is what we want you to put in our listing agreement. This is what you want me to put in our buyer agency agreement. So your firm will go over that with you, what your negotiations wiggle rooms. What type of agency would it be if the unrepresented buyer went directly to the listing agent to put an offer in? So that unrepresented buyer directly to the listing agent could proceed as both listing agent and seller sub-agent. So you could have one person that could be the listing, and then that same person working with that unrepresented buyer. This scenario, a different one of you is acting as a seller sub-agent, but that doesn't matter because you're all a sub-agent of Julie's Real Estate Shop.
Okay, I'm sorry, that confused me just a tad. So you said if the unrepresented buyer went directly to the listing agent, that they could act as the listing agent and the buyer's sub-agent.
Seller sub-agent.
Seller sub-agent, I'm sorry.
Yep.
Would that not be dual agency?
No, because the buyer is unrepresented. I'm getting to dual agency next.
Okay. So,
But
okay.
that would not, that would not be dual agency. And I'll tell you why in just a second.
So Miss Julie, this picture go to which one?
Say it again.
This picture is different than the one you just showed.
This is seller sub-agent when that individual is with, we're all with Julie's Real Estate Shop. And then the other scenario we had is if the seller sub-agent comes with a different firm, from a different firm.
Okay.
Yep. So, and I just want you to see that, Sandra, because I think the easy one to know is that we're all with Julie's Real Estate Shop. But it's important that we understand that you could be with a different firm and bring the buyer customer, as long as I allow, as long as the firm and the seller allow. Thank you. So would the seller sub-agent with a different firm be sort of like a referral? No, you're involved. You're looking at this buyer. You're drawing up the offer for you, writing up the paperwork for them. You're getting them to sign it. You're presenting their offer to the seller because that's what's in the best interest of the seller. If you refer it, you're saying, Linda, this is Bob. Bob, this is Linda. And then you're done. So you're still involved. But again, everything you do is because it's the best interest of the seller. It's the seller's best interest to get an offer. It's the seller's best interest to get that offer under contract, to get it to closing. And that's your objective, is to get that seller, not the buyer, but the seller to closing. So maybe the buyer doesn't ask me if they want it, they should get a home inspection. Maybe they look at me and say, I want to get a home inspection. Can you help me get these scheduled? Well, okay, that's fine. I can do that because I am still assisting you through the transaction. You are still in my plane. Again, it's all in the wording. Very good. Okay, here it comes. The highly anticipated dual agency. Here it is. I know we've been looking forward to this since like last Tuesday. Somebody, thank you for saying that. I need to look over this again. I'm not clear on this topic. You are correct. Agency is something you got to revisit over and over and over and over and over again. So unit 7, I mean, guys, we're already 2 days in unit 7, soon to be 3. You know what I'm saying? So yes, I need you to look over it. We're recording, go back and listen. It's the power of repetition. All right, much long-awaited dual agency. The simplest form of dual agency I can offer you. To define dual agency, it's one firm, one transaction, and 2 clients. The seller has hired Julie's Real Estate Shop to sell 123 Main Street. The buyer has hired Julie's Real Estate Shop to help them buy 123 Main Street. One transaction, meaning the same property. The seller selling it, the buyer wants to buy it. Dual agency is one firm, one transaction, 2 clients, 0 customers. In dual agency, everybody is in first class. First class just got pretty crowded, didn't it? Everybody's in first class. Nobody is back in coach. Dual agency can be one broker working with the seller and the buyer. Dual agency can also be 2 brokers, one working with the buyer, the other one working with the seller. This is what I really need you to understand about dual agency. Well, one thing I need you to understand. Dual agency is about the firm. Dual agency is what is best for the firm. We're going to learn in just a second. Dual agency is not what's best for the clients. It may not be what's best for the transaction. Dual agency is all about the firm. The firm has been put in a position. They have 2 kings that they are expected to serve equally, loyally, the same in the same transaction. Do we see a conflict of interest? You got a seller selling 123 Main Street. You got a buyer buying 123 Main Street, and the firm has been jammed in the middle, trying to serve both parties the same, fairly and equally, and get them through this transaction. Dual agency is for in-house transactions only. In-house meaning both buyer and seller are represented by the same firm. This is not a co-broke. You may affiliate with a firm that has multiple office locations. Maybe they have an office location in Winston and one in Greensboro. They are still with the same firm. Dual agency doesn't just happen by accident. Dual agency is intentionally created with informed written consent of both parties. Get my red bouncing ball. Dual agency is intentionally created with informed written consent of both parties. Let's break that down. Intentionally created means on purpose, with explanation. Means looking at buyers and sellers and saying, this is what dual agency means. It's created purposely with informed written consent of both parties. Buyer and seller have to agree to allow dual agency. If either one of them say no, dual agency can't happen. I got to have 2 yeses. I think off the bat, we can see where this is a conflict of interest. How do you have one firm trying to serve 2 kings? How do you have one firm trying to get both through the transaction? Here's the deal in dual agency. If the firm is in dual agency, the firm and all the brokers in the firm need to take a few steps back. They need to give up a few things. And the biggest thing that goes away in dual agency is advocacy. I cannot fully advocate for one and not the other. In dual agency, we can't give advice. In dual agency, I need you to be on alert for words like, should I, would you recommend that I, do you think that I, because there is no question, no answer to a question in a real estate transaction that doesn't harm the other side. So when the buyer client looks at you and says, should I offer less than asking price? If we were in a co-broke transaction, buyer's agent would say, absolutely offer less than asking price. But now that we're in dual agency, if I say yes under asking, you've harmed my seller. If I say no, you've harmed my buyer. Dual agency is about the firm and treating the firm's clients the same. Buyer may look at you, they've had their home inspection done, and they may look at you and say, I want to ask the seller for repairs. Great, what do you want to ask for? Well, what do you think I should ask? There's no way I can answer that, because if I say, well, just ask for this and this, I could harm the buyer. If I say ask for all the electrical and plumbing, then I could harm the seller. The big trick, the key to understanding dual agency, is that my advocacy goes away. My advice goes away. Now, this sets hard on us. I know many of you told me in your introduction that you're here because you want to help people. You like looking at houses and you want to help people. And now here I am telling you there's an opportunity. You're still helping people. But the key is we need to take a few steps back. And we got to understand that any advice is going to harm the other side. And that's what we got to avoid in dual agency. Before we take a break, and I got more to say about dual, so just bear, this is kind of a bad time to take a break, but bear with me here. Football. We got football fans. If you're not a football fan, you've seen a football game. We all know what we're talking about with football, right? Okay. So let's say we're watching a football game. When you're watching a football game, it's pretty clear that there's 2 teams on the field, right? You got one team in their home whites and you got another team in their away grays. Same thing when you're real estate transaction. It's pretty clear you got 2 different parties. You got the seller wanting to sell and the buyer wanting to buy. There are 2 teams on the field. Prior to dual agency, the firm's role is that of the coach. We're on the sidelines shouting advice. make this offer, get the home inspection. Our role prior to dual agency is that of the coach. Now get into dual agency. Buyers and sellers roles don't change. The buyer's still buying and the seller's still selling. What changes now in dual agency is the firm's role. I can no longer be in the coach. My role changes and now I'm the referee. Am I still an important part of the game? Sure. Am I making sure everybody follows the rules and does what they're supposed to? Deadlines and payments. Are we making sure all this stuff happens? Absolutely. Are referees telling quarterbacks what play to make next? I know, unless they're with the New England Patriots. But other than that, are they telling? Are they telling the quarterbacks which play to make next? No, because that's not the referee's job, is to give advice. Their job is to make sure everybody's playing by the rules. So I like the football analogy because we can see the firm's role change. Like I said, the buyer's still buying and the seller's still selling, but the firm's role has to change. I do have more to say about dual agency, but we also need to take a break. So let's take 10. When we come back, we'll talk more about dual. back with more to say about dual. Please bear with me. We're gonna run through a couple scenarios too. We're gonna put this in practice. So don't let me get distracted. Forget to take attendance. I get so excited, I'm ready to go, but let me take attendance. So cameras are on. Let's say some more about dual. And by the way, if you're not feeling really good about dual, that's okay. I have a possible solution for dual. No guarantee, but I do have a possible solution. But before we talk about that, we got to get through dual. So with our football game analogy, the firm represents both the buyer and the seller with equal loyalty in the same transaction. How do they do so? We have written permission of both parties. And we do so without compromising either principle. If either party says no, I'm not going to allow dual, what they're saying is that the firm can't bring the other side client. Let's say you're at a listing appointment and you and the seller's agreed to hire you, and you and the seller are going through your exclusive right to listing agreement. And within your listing agreement is permission. It's an explanation to do dual, and it's permission to do dual or not. So you explain dual agency because it is intentionally created. So you explain dual agency, and your seller quite rightfully looks at you and says, no, I'm not going to do that. I want to be fully, exclusively represented by the firm. I don't want to share you with the buyer. Doesn't that sound like a common thing, a common thought of the seller? They think they're hiring an advocate. And now here you are babbling on about an opportunity that you may not be able to advocate for them. Dual agency is not about the client, y'all. Dual agency is about the firm. So the seller says, no, I'm not going to do that. That's fine. I can't make anybody do anything. But they do need to understand, if they say no to dual agency, what they're saying is that no agent in our firm can bring their buyer client. If the firm is bringing the buyer, they're unrepresented. Otherwise, the buyers are coming from other firms. If the seller says no to dual, they're saying no to Julie's real estate shop buyer clients. Flip that coin. You're working with a buyer. Maybe you're at your buyer consultation. Maybe you're just talking to them. Maybe the buyer's interested in 5 properties that aren't listed by your firm, so you don't have to get into a full-blown dual agency conversation yet. It comes around, lo and behold, the buyer becomes interested in something that your firm has listed. Now we need firm permission whether or not to do dual agency. And again, it's intentionally created, which means we have these conversations. The buyer says, no, I'm not going to agree to that. I want you to be my advocate. This is why I'm hiring an agent to begin with. That's fine, buyer. You don't have to allow dual agency, but you need to understand, if the buyer says no to dual, what they're saying no to is they can't see anything listed by my firm. They're saying no to those listings. One firm, one transaction, 2 clients, 0 customers. Understand this. Parties can change their mind. Sometimes the seller says no in the beginning, then maybe they've been on the market for 3 months, 6 months with very little interest. And then all of a sudden, there's a buyer client from the firm interested. You think the seller is going to be more apt to change their mind after a couple months? Maybe, I don't know, but can it hurt to revisit it with them? We can say, I understand you initially said no, but now I got this buyer client that wants to see it. Will you consider it? And if they still say no, then we can't show it to that buyer client. If they change their mind, then we do so in writing on the agency agreement. Dual agency All you need is one listing and one buyer. Obviously, bigger firms run into dual agency a lot more often than smaller firms because you have more listings, you have more buyers, you come with more inventory. Let's say you affiliate with a firm. There's a couple around here that have like 500, 700 agents. If anybody says no, that's a lot of agents they're saying no to, right? You're not just saying no to the one you're working with, you're saying no to all of our client, all of our buyer or seller clients, because it's about the firm and who we represent. I think I always say, with that being said, dual agency really is one phone call away. All you need is a listing. If you're a sole practitioner, a sole proprietor, how many people you think work in that firm? A sole practitioner. Yeah, you are a one-man show. It is just you. And you have a listing. If you get a call off that listing from the buyer that wants to hire you, poof, you're in dual agency. So please don't get it in your heads that it's big firms. They do deal with it a lot more because they have more inventory. But all you need is a listing. The other thing I don't want you guys to get in your head, the common perception about dual agency is you have the listing and then a buyer reaches out to you interested in the listing. But consider this, you've been working with the buyer for months and all of a sudden your firm gets a new listing. That's when we need to have that conversation. When they say, ooh, you guys just listed something and I really want to see it. That's when we need to make sure we can talk about it before, and we need to because it's part of our agency agreements. But the hard conversation happens when a buyer's trying to see your listing or the seller's trying to allow the buyer in. That's when we need to make sure that they really understand that one firm, one transaction, two clients. I need you guys to always remember dual agency is intentionally created. It doesn't just happen. And I'll show you guys again. We'll look at our agency agreements. We'll look at some resources. Let the forms help you put words in your mouth. Because once you get your license, we're the ones explaining dual agency to these buyers and sellers. It's intentionally created with informed written consent of both parties. So with that being said, the big no-no in dual agency is undisclosed dual agency. Undisclosed dual agency means we just start acting like a dual agent without it being intentionally created with informed written consent. This will allow you to go down for disciplinary action. By the way, General Statute 93A-6, that's license law and commission rule. Specifically, A-6 is the disciplinary action. I also have 93A-6 in the, I think it's in the Julie folder in the online learning system. I've asked you guys to read Commission Rule 58A.0104. I'm asking you to look over 93A-6 because a common question I get is, what can I get in trouble for? And all of that is spelled out in 93A-6. And one of those is undisclosed dual agency. So what we want every single time is that dual agency is purposely created. It doesn't just happen. It is purposely created with informed written consent. And understand, even though you're in dual agency, again, maybe you're a single agent working with both buyer and seller. Maybe we're two agents. One of you is working with the seller, one of you is working with the buyer. Doesn't matter. I still don't have a golden ticket to share confidential information about one party to the other. Put yourself in the role if you were the single agent. You work with and talk to the seller every day. You work with and talk to the buyer every day. Don't you know a lot about both? How can you be an advocate for both? How can you help one without hurting the other? And that's where we got to take a few steps back. That's where we got to always keep their confidential information. Get them through the transaction. Oh, and by the way, even if you're a dual agent, we always have a duty to discover and disclose material facts. Now what I'm saying is I don't care what your role is. Are you a single agent? Are you a dual agent? I don't care. We always have a duty to discover and disclose material facts. So let's look at our pictures. What does dual agency look like? Well, Julie's Real Estate Shop is the firm representing both parties equally. But now instead of being side by side, hand in hand with the buyer and seller, you're just hanging out. One of you may be working with the selling agent. I'm sorry, with the buyer. One of you may be working with the seller. Maybe you have one agent working in both. That picture's coming up next. But look at the buyer and seller. You dropped their hand. You moved away from them. Understand, in dual agency, exclusivity goes away. If you're in dual agency, you're not exclusively representing one side or the other. You are now representing both equally and fairly in the same transaction. We're going to talk a little bit more about exclusivity. That's a really big word. We're going to talk a little bit more about that when we get into a little bit more in Unit 8. But dual agency, the firm is straddling the line equally. The firm owes both buyer and seller that same transaction. So dual agency can be two agents. Dual agency can be one working with the seller and one working with the buyer. The question we need to ask ourselves is, did both buyer and seller hire the firm? And if so, did we get their consent to do dual agency? What questions do I have on dual?
Question. So with dual agency, old car is given to the firm, pretty much.
I'm still going to give my principals, old car. The big thing that goes away is that advocacy. You know, I may not be able to be as loyal to both sides at the same time, but I'm still going to be obedient. I'm still going to disclose information. I'm still going to be accountable for their funds. I'm still going to practice reasonable skill, care, and diligence. I'm still going to have confidentiality. So of old car, the one that kind of comes back a little bit, they don't get equal loyalty anymore. They got to share that, or full loyalty anymore. They got to share that loyalty. But again, I think that's a little easier to remember if we just think that the advocacy goes away. I can't give either party advice. I can't advocate for one side over the other. And that's where that loyalty gets a little shaky there, Rochelle. But the rest of old car, they're still getting because they still hired me. Dual agency is not best for the client. Again, the whole reason they think they're hiring an agent is to have somebody on their side, to have somebody up here at the top of the screen holding hands with them. In dual agency, the firm is straddling, and all the agents in the firm are straddling the wall. All of us. Doesn't matter if you're that one agent or two agent, all of us. And I'll be honest, you guys, the common misconception of the consumer thinks dual agency is you working with both the seller and the buyer. I don't think the consumer realizes the relationship is with the firm. Because I've had buyers, they were looking like Oak Ridge, Summerfield, and I brought up dual agency because we were creating agency, and there was nothing my firm had listed in that area. So I wasn't overly worried about dual agency at that time. But in creating agency, we still need to talk about these things. And my buyer looked at me and he said, I don't like that. I said, you don't like what? He said, I don't want you working with me and the seller. Fair enough. Totally fair. I understand that completely. And I said, well, it's not about me, it's about the firm. I said, but as it stands right now, if you're still looking in this area, my firm doesn't have anything listed. So as it stands right now, dual agency isn't going to happen. What if? What if they change where they're looking? What if my firm gets a new listing in Oak Ridge tomorrow, right? Could it come up? Absolutely. If they change location, if we got a listing, and I told them, I said, if it comes up, we will readdress this. But otherwise, where it stands right now, we don't have to worry about it. He said, okay, and it never came up. But that was his misconception, is that I was going to be the listing agent and the selling agent, single agent, dual agent. And I don't think what they understand is it's about the firm. You still provide information for both clients to make informed decision, as long as it doesn't in any way negatively harm the other side, their negotiations. Let's say, for example, we want to determine, my buyer wants to determine what they want to offer, and my seller wants to determine if that's a reasonable offer price. How do you have that conversation with two people and two different agenda, right? The seller wants the most they can get. The buyer wants to get in for as little as they can. How do you equally have this conversation? So in that case, Benjamin, I would pull my report. I would pull my comps. I would do one for both. I would make copy, and I'd give one to the seller and one to the buyer. I can't advise them what to offer, but I can share information. I can help them come to that decision. But I'm not going to pull comps to help the seller sway one way, and I'm not going to pull comps to help the buyer sway. I'm going to pull the exact same, give both parties the exact same numbers, and say, based on this, you guys tell me what you want to do. We almost always have the opportunity to have these conversations about what happens when you want to make an offer, what happens when we get an offer come in, what's the contract to closing process. Like in the buyer consultation, we should be talking about the benefits of a home inspection. So in many cases, we have the opportunity to have these conversations before we ever take them out and show them property, before the opportunity for dual agency arrives. So at least now that we're in dual agency, they got it in their buyer agent packet, right? So they could go back through, I could say, now refer back to what we talked about, but now that we're in dual agency, that's where I need to make sure. And yeah, pretty much, what we do for the sellers, isn't it only fair that we share the same with the buyers, keeping their confidential information about each other confidential. Just because I'm in dual doesn't mean I can call the buyer and say, I know how low the seller's willing to go. No, we're still going to let them, we're just not, tipping them off. That's not fair. And dual agency may not be fair, but it's not like really, really not fair. It's tough. I think a lot of times the market dictates that. Like I said, if you're a seller, you said absolutely not to dual agency. 6 months later, you're still on the market with very little interest. And lo and behold, Rachelle brings a buyer client. In that seller, I go back to my seller and say, I know you said no to dual, but another agent, my firm, wants to bring her buyer client. Can we revisit this? Does the seller have to agree to change their mind? No, but at least now that the opportunity is here, I mean, there's a difference in talking about possibilities, but now the opportunity is here. And if we have a no on either side, now that the opportunity is here, I think it's in their best interest that we revisit that. I know you said no, and I appreciate you saying no, but remember what you're saying no to. You said you couldn't see this listing, or you said you wouldn't let this buyer. You want to change your mind. Good rule of thumb, basic contract law. Once something is in writing, the only way to change it is in writing. That reminds me, before I forget again, I need you guys to edit your book real quick. Turn with me to page 162. And I know we're not here yet. We're getting there, I promise, but I don't want to forget. Page 162, you guys see there are two examples, situation 1 and situation 2. Cross out situation 2. cross it out. There's confusing verbiage in there. And it's just that, it confuses you. So cross out situation 2. The other edit, fast forward just a bit, page 175. 175. There's 2 practice exam questions there. You guys see that? Cross out number 2. And it's all verbiage about oral versus writing. So let me back up. Basic contract law says the only way to change an agreement in writing is in writing. So if your seller has said no on the listing agreement in writing, but then they change their mind, we need to get it to them, have them strike through initial and date, and then agree to do dual. Let's see, the second one was on 162 and 175. Dual agency is 1 firm, 1 transaction, 2 clients. So the question we got earlier, great question. The question we got earlier, the form a seller subagency, where the seller subagent, the agent, is also with Julie's Real Estate Shop. Wouldn't that be a form of dual agency? And the answer is no, because the seller is your client, the buyer's unrepresented, meaning they are a customer. So do you have dual agency? No. In order to have dual agency, I need 2 clients, 0 customers. If either one of them didn't hire you, no dual. And again, you guys, a lot of firms have multiple locations. When you affiliate with your firm, they will let you know what their other office locations are. And you may be in dual agent with an agent that you've never even met. You know, Winston and Greensboro may come together, right? Doesn't matter, because dual agency is about the firm. Questions?
Let's say you are representing it. I know that a dual agency is the firm, but let's say that you are representing both the buyer and the seller.
Mhm.
And let's say that you were the listing agent and the buyer came to you last. Has there ever been a situation where you've terminated or not you personally, but terminated a contract and let them go with a different agent?
You know what, Kayla, I don't have personal experience, but I have heard scenarios, and it might be that that they aren't getting along. Now we got to get the BIC involved, right? Now the BIC's and it might be that it's in the best interest of the client if the BIC lets one of them go. I'm going to get a referral fee from the firm I send you to, but it might be that the BIC decides that that's in the best interest of the clients. A referral fee is better than nothing at all, right? So if we can't get this to work, we can't. So that might be, because let's say you have a listing and a buyer, you've been out showing a buyer property, and now they're interested in this, and neither one of us said no. And they won't budge. I need both of them to budge, right, in order to proceed. So the BIC, and again, that's going to be up to the firm's policy if they'll allow that, but they may agree to release one of the parties, send them to a firm down the street. Yeah, I'm going to get a referral fee. So back to the conversation about these single agent firms. They never, ever, ever run into dual agency. Doesn't that seem a little bit more appealing now, right? You don't have to deal with this if you're a single agent firm, because you will only ever have one client. I'm not pushing you one way or the other, but thinking about the dual agency is tricky. Can we understand the risks here? I mean, your line is like really fine. And some firms say, yeah, no, I don't want to do that. Single agent only. They may say we'll work with only sellers, only buyers, or buyers or sellers, only one per transaction. Makes a little bit more sense now, right? Because of the of the risks. Proceed with caution. Again, this is why it's got to be intentionally created with informed written consent. Somebody says you're not a fan. I agree with you. Guess what? It's not up to us. If you're not a fan, the best I can tell you is to do this form of dual agency. Be the 1 or 2 brokers. It's still about the firm, but at least you're not stuck in that situation. And by the way, to be a single agent, dual agent, they also have to agree to that. It's not just agreeing that the firm's in dual agency. They also have to agree to allow that one agent to be with both. It's not what's best for the client, but it allows the firm to assist both in the transaction. You got an interested seller, you got an interested buyer. My hands are tied. What can I do? I'm going to take a few steps back, no longer offer advocacy, and proceed with caution.
Julie, can the agent turn down dual agency, or do you pretty much have to do what the firm tells you to do?
With the firm. So
Okay.
if the firm allows it, now you could choose not to practice single agent, dual agency, right? But if the firm allows dual agency, you're in. Personal note, totally personal decision. I decided when I got in sales, I was not doing single agent, dual agency. It makes my eye twitch. It just makes me nervous. I chose not to do single agent, dual agency. So if I'm in a situation where I find myself getting close to that, I'm going to pull in a teammate or somebody else from the firm. I'm going to be like, hey, you want a buyer? You know, we're going to work this together. But and understand, you guys, you can. The commission will allow it. Did everybody hear me? That was my personal choice. Can you? Yes. By the way, in dual agency, there is nobody else to pay. The firm keeps all the commission. They're still going to pay the listing agent. They're still going to pay the selling agent. But the firm doesn't have to share their commission because there is nobody to share it with, because there's only one firm. You guys still got your private chats set? Private chat, tell me A, B, C, or D. Weigh in. So Tara, let's talk about Tara. Tara is a broker with XYZ Realty. She enters into a listing agreement with the seller. What does that make the seller to XYZ Realty? The seller is our client. They hired us by entering into an agency agreement. So I got a seller client. Tara finds a buyer for the same property and agrees to represent the buyer. What does it mean when you're represented? You've hired the firm. So we got a seller client, we got a buyer client, same transaction, same firm. This will allow Tara to possibly work as a dual agent as long as she gets permission from both. If she just starts acting like a dual agent without intentionally created, informed written consent, she is practicing undisclosed dual agency. And I just rattled off about the general statute that says that's not okay. License law, that's not okay. Intentionally created with informed written consent. I don't know if she can do it or not yet, right? Because she's got to have the conversation with both. We got to get the permission from both. As mentioned, I have a possible solution for dual agency. No guarantees, but I have a possible solution. And that possible solution is called designated dual agency. Understand this. Designated dual agency is a form of dual agency. It's one firm, one transaction, two clients. Here's the difference. Designated dual agency is always two brokers. One broker in the firm has been designated to work exclusively with the seller. A different broker in the firm has been designated to work exclusively with the buyer. There's that word exclusive again. Very, very important. Get prepared for that. You're going to be tired of me saying exclusive by the time we get done. Very important word. Designated dual agency. The firm has to offer it. It's not automatic. Not all firms offer designated dual agency. An example of a firm that may not offer designated dual agency would be the sole practitioner. Remind me how many people are with the sole practitioner? One. How many agents do I need to do designated? Two. That math doesn't add up, does it? So if you're a sole practitioner, if you're a one-man show, you can't offer designated. All right, what if there's, I don't know, 5 of us? We're a small firm. We do everything together. We go on listing appointments together. We go on buyers consultations together. We may not be a good candidate for designated dual agency. I'll tell you why in just a second. So in order to take dual agency a step further into designated, I first have to have a yes to do dual before we can get a yes to do designated. If they say no to dual, designated is not an option. So that might be another trick to help convince them why doing dual, because now we got a possibility if the firm offers it, we got a possibility of offering designated. Hear me, the firm has to offer it. If the firm doesn't provide it, then it's not available. So designated is an optional approach to dual. We got to have parties, we got to have consent. The firm should have a written company policy about how they're going to practice, how they're going to handle designated. Unfortunately, there's no license law or commission rule that requires the firm to have a written company policy. It's just highly recommended. So we get an agreement to do dual, and then we can, if the firm offers it, we can talk about designated. And this is what happens in designated. Remember, in dual agency, we are all straddling the line. We are all straddling that line, the firm and all the agents. In designated, the broker in charge can kick one of you off the wall to work exclusively with the seller. And then the BIT can kick another one of you off the wall to work exclusively with the buyer. In designated dual agency, exclusivity comes back. This is better for the buyers and sellers. Does this give us the warm and fuzzies about real estate again? This is what the buyers and sellers hired you for, was that advocacy, that exclusivity. Once you've been kicked off the wall, you two agents, you proceed, you might as well be with 2 different firms, because you are working with those buyers and sellers exclusively again. part of what the policy says is how the BIC is going to designate. The BIC should be going to the listing agent and saying, do you know anything confidential about my buyer client that could harm them in this transaction? And then they're going to the selling agent. They're saying, do you know anything confidential about my seller client that can harm them in this transaction? Maybe you had a previous relationship with them. Maybe you guys your kids play soccer and you're both on the PTA. Is there a good chance you can know something about their motive, know something about what they're doing? The BIC needs to first make sure that you don't have confidential information about the other side before you can be designated.
Miss Julie, can you go back just for 1 second for that slide? Just 1 second. Okay, I got it, buyer client. I'm sorry, I was writing that cream part that I got it, thank you.
So if we go back to our football game, prior to dual agency, we had buyers and sellers playing. The firm was playing the role of the coach, right? We were on the side shooting, shouting advice. Now that we were in dual agency, buyers are still buyers, sellers are still selling. The firm's role changes. The firm can't be the coach in the game in dual agency. So the firm's role change and they become the referee. In designated, those two agents' role changes again. The firm stays in dual, by the way. Dual does not go away. Everybody's still straddling that wall except those two agents that I kicked off. So the firm's still in dual, but the two agents I kicked off the wall go back to being the coach. They are back on the sideline shouting, make this offer, get the home inspection, ask for repairs. They're back, just the two agents that were designated. The firm remains in dual. Understand, dual agency is not eliminated.
Is it still in the best interest of the agency if it's designated?
This is what's better for the clients. This brings it back into the clients because exclusivity comes back.
Oh.
The firm's still in dual, but that exclusivity comes back. That's why they think they're hiring you, is for that advocacy, is for that. They may not know those words, but those advocacy, that exclusivity. And by allowing, if the firm allows designated, that brings it back. The BIC cannot designate you. They cannot kick you off the wall if you have prior confidential information about the other side. They should ask you, do you know about the other party? And if you say yes, they may need to find somebody else in the firm to designate. Again, Julie's real estate shop would pay you a referral fee because you probably did some work. So I'd get you a little something, but not all firms think like me. Are you going to get paid or not? I can't answer that. Agency isn't about you though, remember? Agency is about what's in the best interest of the client. And when it comes to dual agency, designated dual agency is what's in the best interest of the client. The other thing about designated dual agency, and this is the #1 problem topic in Unit 7. The other thing to understand about designated dual agency, the provisional broker is soon to be you guys. Once you get licensed, you're on provisional status. I call you guys my newbies. I always think of you guys as brokers with training wheels. While you're a newbie on provisional status, you cannot be designated opposite of your broker in charge. As a provisional broker, as a newbie, your BIC should be in your back pocket. They're consulting you, they're preparing you for that listing appointment. They may even go with you on that listing appointment. They're helping you get ready for that buyer consultation. They're involved in your transaction because they are your training wheels. You can ride your bike, but you can't ride it without your training wheels as a provisional broker. And we'll talk more about that relationship. But due to the very nature of their relationship, the BIC should know something confidential about the PB's client because they should have been involved. They should have been there. So due to the very nature of their relationship, they just took it off the table. Hear me. They can be in dual. Because dual is about the firm. They cannot be designated opposite of each other. Does everybody hear me? Yes to dual, they cannot be designated opposite each other because the BIC probably knows something confidential about the PB's client. Any other relationship is allowed as long as you don't have prior confidential information about the other side. So PB and a PB can be designated opposite of each other. A BIC can be designated opposite of the full broker, as long as they don't have prior confidential information about the other side. I'll be honest, as a full broker, my BIC don't know what I'm doing half the time. I don't get my BIC involved until it's on fire, and I'm the first one to go charging in his office going, help me. That's when he learns about my client for the first time. That's a full broker. I can go and do, as a provisional broker, you got to answer to the BIC. Questions on this slide?
Does that mean a provisional broker can't be designated at all? Is that what you mean?
Nope. They can only not be designated opposite of their broker in charge. They can be designated opposite another PB. They can be designated opposite a full broker. They just can't be designated opposite of their BIC.
Okay.
Designated brings that exclusivity back. Like I said, now that you've been kicked off the wall, now that you've been designated, the two agents proceed, they might as well be with different firms. Here's our picture. I'll come back to that if need be, but here's our picture. Julie's Real Estate Shop and all the other agents, we're still straddling that line, aren't we? We are still in dual. One of you has been kicked off the wall and are allowed to hold hands with the buyer. A different one of you has been kicked off the wall and is now allowed to hold hands with the seller. Again, Julie's Real Estate Shop is still in dual. Designated doesn't eliminate dual. It just allows exclusivity. It allows two of you to bring exclusivity back. It allows two of you to go back to being the coach. And again, when you affiliate with your firm, they'll let you know what you can and can't do. Can or cannot offer designated, for example. If they do allow you to offer designated, then, you know, what's that look like? Before we get there, though, we got to have an understanding dual and designated. And what I did, I went ahead because I couldn't wait until Unit 8. This is straight from our listing agreement. And within the listing agreement, but prior to this is a whole explanation of dual agency, like a whole page of what it's about. But this is where we get that informed written consent. So straight from our listing agreement, we're told to initial either dual agency or exclusive representation. Do we see this? Or exclusive representation. So either the seller authorizes the firm to act as a dual agent, representing both the seller and the buyer, or the seller wants exclusive representation and does not authorize dual agency. So we got to get the seller to initial one or the other. And before we ask them to initial one or the other, they need to understand what they're initialing. If they do allow dual agency, seller does or does not authorize the same agent to represent both seller and buyer. And then if available, can we offer designated dual agency? I have to have a yes to dual before I can get a yes to designated. If they say no to dual, what they're saying is, I demand exclusivity. What do we think? Can they agree to only designated? No. I got to get a yes to dual before we can agree. If they say there's no such thing as designated without dual. You got to have dual because designated is a form of dual.
Just curious, does the client usually, is the fee the same for dual or exclusive?
That's a great question. And honestly, that's up to the firm's policy. Some firms may say, if we're representing both Mr. and Mrs. Seller, we'll reduce your commission.
Okay.
Because they're still getting paid on both sides, right? And they're still going to probably pay you what they agreed to pay you anyway. But really, they'd be giving up some of theirs. So yeah, sometimes you do have a firm that says, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, if we get into designated, your commission will be, or dual, your commission will be less. So up to the firm's policy. It's a lot to take in, isn't it? Agency. That's a big word. Watching our time, I'm going to skip these couple slides, but I promise you we will start here on Thursday. And actually, the next couple slides are just kind of some key points about dual and designated. So this, if I can get my clicker to click, this will be a great place for us to start. So we'll come back to these on Thursday. But just to kind of wrap this section up, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. So like 4 minutes is perfect. As mentioned, there's also a property management agreement. You may run into agency in rentals. So in a rental situation, the owner, landlord, investor, whatever you want to call them, the owner of the property hires the agent to manage their property. And they do so by using the property management agreement. Again, we will see this briefly in Unit 12. We don't actually go over the form, but we do talk about it. So we will talk about property management. Understand, property management agreement is an agency agreement. You're just being hired for a different purpose. You're not being hired to buy or sell. You're being hired to manage. When you manage, you're, collecting rent and making repairs and all that good stuff. Typically in a rental, the landlord is the client. Tenants in a residential rental are rarely represented. They can be, I'm not telling you they can't be. But in a residential rental situation, tenants are very rarely represented. In a commercial rental transaction, it's not uncommon to have the landlord and the tenant represented. So because of this, dual agency, we don't deal with that much. Anybody going into property management or in property management? Couple of you, handful of you. Couple of you are looking at me like one thing at a time, Julie. I hear you. I hear you. Let me let you get your license first, and then you can figure out what you want to do with it, right? Oh, wow. Questions? Okay. So what we're going to start with, see, I am back on page where? Kind of the bottom of page 163 are those slides that I just skipped, 163, 164. But again, I think that would be a great place to start on Thursday because it'll give us a good refresher on dual and designated. So we'll go back and pick those slides up. After that, we get into our agency disclosure. So we need to talk about how we need to disclose my agency status to the consumer, let them know who I represent, where my loyalty is, all that good thing. So we'll talk about our agency disclosure. And then the last thing in Unit 7 is talking a little bit briefly about your role as an independent contractor. Real estate sales agents aren't hired. We are an independent contractors. And as an independent contractor, who do I technically work for? Me. I am my own boss. So if you notice, the words I've used is affiliated with a firm. The firm's not hiring you. You're affiliating with them. You are an independent contractor. So we need to talk a little bit about that distinction. That's right, 1099 versus W-2. Yep, we'll talk about that. After that, we jump right into Unit 8, which is our agency agreements. We're going to talk specifically about working with sellers, specifically about working with buyers. We'll look at those agency agreements. We're just chucking right along. I'll leave the call open for the study group. I'll stop recording here in just a second. Do I have any other questions? Gave you guys a lot tonight to take into consideration. Please go back, read it again, listen to it again, watch it again and again and again. Again, if you're leaving here tonight going, agency's easy, I got it, I'm telling you, you're doing it wrong. I don't know another way to put that. You gotta hear it again and again. And guys, next week we move on from agency, but guess what? It's still a heavily tested topic. So you guys got to keep back and refreshing it between now and March, whenever your exam is. We got to keep going though. I need you to keep going back and hearing it again and again and again. And again, be agencyed out. You know you're in a good place. When you're sick and tired of agency, you are on your way. Questions? All right, I'm going to keep the call open for the study group. If you want to stick around, I'll stop recording. If you want to stick around and exchange phone numbers, emails, whatever you want, you have that opportunity. I'll probably come in and check on you guys like